So A goes into B and then slides down, goes into G. So F should be in the middle.
Then what's J for?
Would you pass me the Allen key?
Which one?
It's IKEA, Walt, the medium-sized one that we have 10 of.
Oh, the one we built the Skardenloft with.
Yeah, the Skardenloft and the Ludenvik.
Oh, and the Puldenflademoff.
And there, we did it.
Our 19th shoe rack. It can go right next to the Ludenvig, which is for umbrellas, I think?
I thought that was the futon. Where's Frank going to sleep tonight? The Skardenloft. Oh, Lord.
Welcome to the Get Commanded podcast by the Greensboro Commander community. It's the GCP by the GCC, helping you to have better games of Commander. I am your host, Walt.
And hello, Commander players. It's your construction worker, IKEA, James, other hosts. Oh, my Lord. I'm now wondering if the Space Commanders have just listened to our lives and the transmission that we're about to receive has something to do with that episode of trying to build shoe racks. Do you think that's how they get their transmissions?
From the skit?
Possibly, because that's like the skit isn't. We didn't write that. That's actually just a recording from our lives. We just laugh because we just heard a recording of it. Right?
That's true. Yeah. So maybe that's how they beam the ideas out of our minds, bounce them back. Wow, are the Space Commanders even real?
Oh my god. Well, we better read the transmission before Walt goes existential.
There is an incoming transmission from the deep depths of the galaxy, from the Space Commanders. It's time to get commanded.
There are rules that govern the building of Commander decks. Only once you master them can you begin to break them.
Right. It's definitely... I knew it. I knew that they've been listening to us build things, so they want to hear us build Commander decks.
I feel like this has been a long time coming. We did cover quite a few questions that were specifically about deck building.
We had a
whole
section dedicated
We did
to
too,
it,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, we had like 3 sections and one of them was just deck building. Yeah.
And I remember in that, actually, I'm calling back to that Q&A, because you actually had a really great analogy that I think the Space Commanders have used as a reference.
Yeah.
Do you remember the analogy you had around Kung Fu?
It's true. I think they're referring back to an analogy I sort of outlined before. Yeah, which is about Kung Fu, which I did for like sort of like 4 or 5 years. I did Kung Fu at this little school. Very good fun. I vividly remember that like I sort of was like I did it for long enough that I was getting like reasonably good at it, but I certainly wasn't a black belt. But I sort of was getting towards the point where I could start, maybe if I took it really seriously.
Could you break a board by that point?
We weren't that kind of Kung Fu.
Okay.
But, you know, heading that direction. And I guess I was sort of reaching that point where the people in the school were starting to be like, hey, you know, well, if you really applied yourself, maybe you could start to work towards being black belt. Like sort of on that cusp, right? Wasn't there yet, definitely. But I was sort of in that mindset. And so what I would find myself doing is I found myself sort of comparing myself a little bit. You shouldn't do this, but you compare yourself a little bit to the people who are black belts, right? And you start to go like, oh, you know, they're doing things that I know we're not supposed to do.
Like spinning kicks and backflips and things.
Like more so like the kind of things that sort of philosophically we were kind of supposed to not be prioritizing. So like the type of Kung Fu that I did was very like sort of Tai Chi oriented. So it was like about using energy, about not like outputting strength, but instead like manipulating weight and that kind of thing. Like that was sort of the vibe we were going for. But I found that like some of the black belts were really stiff and like used a lot of strength in their movement. They still had all the principles that I was learning, but they sort of learned to move past them. And at the time, when you don't know the rules that well, especially when you're starting out, you're kind of like, well, they're just a bunch of hypocrites, right? They tell me to do this thing, and then
Why have I been practicing this stance for 20 minutes?
Yeah, when they just throw it out immediately, right? They do all the other different stances. But the thing is, and this is what the Space Commanders are alluding to, in order to be able to move outside the structure of rules, you have to understand them well enough to know why they're rules in the first place.
And and you directly linked that with deck building.
Yes.
Because there are rules to deck building, but you need to know those rules before you can add your own strength.
Absolutely.
To the thing.
Yeah, I think the thing to, like, because we are going to cover every aspect of deck building, if that wasn't immediately obvious, the thing to say, like, right off the bat, a lot of the numbers that we're going to, like, throw out there in terms of, you know, card draw and ramp and this kind of thing are numbers you'll maybe have seen before. Like, if you follow the Command Zone, if you follow, for me, I'm a big fan of the Nitpicking Nerds on YouTube. If you follow Nitpicking Nerds, a lot of these numbers are going to line up, like, pretty closely to what you've seen online. And it's because there are kind of general Commander deck building rules that are not hard and fast, but I do feel, and I think you probably agree with me here, that you probably should start with those rules and treat them as pretty hard and fast, so that then when you know deck building really well, you can start to go, oh, I can see that this is an instance in which I'm allowed to break this rule.
I think that's a really good analogy. I really like it. And like Walt said, this episode is going to have a ton of information. It's actually so big that it is going to be 2 episodes.
We've committed to it. We've done it before. We've split an episode into 2 parts, but we're actually saying to ourselves, we know how long this is going to be. We're saying right off the bat, it's 2 episodes. This will just be part 1, but we are going to cover a lot of the really crucial stuff in this one and then sort of branch out a bit in the second one.
Yes, and more importantly, in this episode, we are going to be throwing card name after card name after card name at you. And firstly, for new listeners, I apologize. Some of the cards that we're going to reference you've probably never heard of. We will try and explain basically what they do. If not read them verbatim, we'll try and do our little guessing game if we can read the words correctly without seeing the card.
Which we are getting pretty good at, I feel, as well.
And even some of the wacky ones, like the old ones, how they read like you skip your discard phase, is now just no maximum hand size.
Yeah, that's true.
It's really challenging and fun game for us to play, but for you guys, we'll try and be as succinct as possible, but tell you at least what the card does in layman's terms. But honestly, if you use Scryfall or just Google, you'll get the card pretty quick and you'll know exactly what we're talking about.
We're jumping out a bit. We are definitely at the end of the episode going to recommend a bunch of our favorite tools, but I'm sure this is not the first time or the last time we're going to talk about Scryfall. So yes, if you're trying to find a card we're talking about, I would say just go straight to Scryfall.
When we were writing this episode, we had 3 windows open at all times. It was the window that we were writing the episode on. It was probably a Moxfield deck of Waltz at the same time, and Scryfall was the other one.
Scryfall's fantastic.
It is phenomenal.
We love it. Well, look, if we're going to build a Commander deck...
Which is, by the way, first rule, 100 cards.
Yes, 100 cards.
You can have 1 commander or partner commanders.
Or Friends Forever commanders, as of the Stranger Things thing.
Correct.
Super strange. You can also have a companion if you fulfill the requirements.
Yes. Wow.
I think when you have a companion, I think you have 97. Like, I think the minimum number of cards. I just had 4 backflips there. The minimum number of cards you can have in a commander deck, like in the main board, I believe is 97. If you have 2 partner commanders and a companion in the companion zone. But look, for most decks, it's going to be 99 cards in the main and a commander. But speaking of, we're going to probably we don't have to right now, but most of the time, I think we're going to want to pick a commander pretty early, right?
It's either picking the commander or picking the play style.
That's true. We can either pick the commander right off the bat, or we can say to ourselves, hey, I'm going to build a wheels deck, right? I'm going to build a deck that cares about drawing lots of cards.
Yeah.
The commander can come later. I know there's a bunch of those, but I'm definitely building a wheels deck. That's my play style. Yeah.
And I think there was actually a question in our Q&A episode. One of our community members asked, what do you pick first, the playstyle or the commander?
Yes.
And I think my response was, you can do either. It's totally fine. But the key thing at the start of the process, and this is where the advice begins, about 10 minutes into the episode, this is where our advice actually begins. At the start of the process of building a commander deck, there's a couple of questions that you should ask yourself. But the big one, always at the top, is why? And I love asking myself why in life in general, but when you're building a commander deck, whether it's choosing the playstyle, picking the right card draw, the right ramp, whatever it is, continuously ask yourself why. So, why am I building this deck?
Yeah, and so why am I building this deck will naturally lead to other questions, which are going to be really important ones to answer. Like, what do you want to do with the deck? Like, it sounds like kind of obvious, but for some people, that might be a tricky question to answer, because someone might say to themselves, like, oh, you know, I want to win with a huge, crazy combo. And it's like, okay, that's already pointing you towards a particular
You've eliminated
kind of deck.
half the decks on EDHREC.
Yeah, like a good chunk of combat-based decks that aren't combo combat are gone from you right now. Like, a bunch of cards are probably not going to be right for you. So, like, you know, getting these questions out of the way early is going to make your deck building process a lot easier, because as we all know who have built decks before, most of the agony of building a deck is that we end up with about 140 cards and then we have to cut 40 of them.
I love it when that Moxfield warning comes up of you have too many cards in the main board.
I've never had that problem. Wow.
Really?
Never.
I just chuck them all in the main board, then I move it to that considering section.
Oh.
But look, there's a couple of other questions you should ask yourself right at the beginning of the process. For experienced Commander players who already have a collection of Commander decks, a really great question to ask yourself is, what's missing in your collection? Like, I have now 14 Commander decks. I know, I've got a problem. I need to disassemble some.
It's so funny. We've gone ahead of one another a few times, but we're like weirdly balancing out to almost exactly the same number. I think I have 15 now. So
That's
we're like
wild.
Collectively almost 30.
That's ridiculous. We can run like 5 pods just with our decks.
It's crazy. We've got problems. But yes, I 100% agree with you. And I think I've talked a couple times. I mean, the joke deck that I always mention is Kaza, right? But the
11 minutes. Yes, it's mentioned. Walt's is
earliest
deck is
Kaza
mentioned.
ever. Yeah, we got there. Yeah, like, the reason I built that deck was because, well, I ended up building 2 decks, which I've talked about before. I built the tie game deck at the same time, which was because I identified that the sort of archetype that was really missing from my decks was decks that were about spells. Like, that were not creature-based, were not tribal-based,
because you're the token boy.
I love tokens, I love going wide. And I realized, like, I don't have, like, a spell slinger deck, and I don't have, like, a big spells deck. And in the process of trying to build one deck that did both, I instead built 2 decks.
And now you've actually found a really interesting middle ground as well with Wart, the Goblin Commander.
Wart the Raid Mother, yeah. I actually realized that I have 3 of the Ultimate Guard archives, and I try to have like a good mix of playstyles in each box, and it's becoming increasingly difficult because I've realized I'm like overlapping a bit. So I'm like, okay, there has to be only one graveyard deck in each box. That's tricky because it's like, okay, well, immediately Merrin, Araumi, and my Golem deck have to be separate, like right off the bat.
The fact that there's a Dimir, a Golgari, and then a Selesnya graveyard deck.
It's true. But then, like, I did the same thing the other day with spells. I was like, okay, like, I have my big spells Wizards deck, I've got my Spellslinger Tygan deck, and now I have this Goblin copy spell deck, and they have to be in separate boxes, otherwise I'm going to be like, okay, I finished with my Spellslinger deck. Time to pick out my copy spells deck.
I think that's a really, like, great way to find, for experienced players, what they're looking to build, because now I've got such an array of decks, now I'm looking at retiring some and building a new version of something.
Yeah.
Another great question for experienced players to do, or even new players that want the step up, is how powerful do you want the deck to be? Because, like, immediately, if you choose a commander, I'm going to name drop my one too, Niv Mizzet Perun, the second you pull out him, he will up the power level of your deck, because he is a busted card that has card draw and damage and removal. It's incredible. Can't be countered. It does everything.
Yeah.
So, like, generally, if you say, I want a really powerful deck, you're already gravitating towards certain commanders and certain playstyles.
It's true, yeah. And it's funny, that will actually... picking your playstyle there will actually already narrow down the commander that you're going to pick.
Exactly.
Right? Because you're going to be saying to yourself, I want to build this deck that, like, the commander does everything. Like, it's pure value. And it's like, okay, well, you're actually probably talking about, what, maybe like 50 commanders total?
Chillane,
Corvold, like, anything printed in Eldraine.
I listed 2 commanders. Both of them were the Brawl commanders.
From Eldraine,
hilarious.
Decks are ridiculous. It's true, So, asking how strong the deck's going to be is going to narrow it down a lot. I think also imagining, and this is related to the strength of the deck thing, thinking about, like, how you want the game to go. And this might seem like a weird question to ask because we're just beginning our deck, but it's going to dictate how you choose your cards, right? Because, again, like we said before, like, if you're going to want to build a combo-y kind of thing, your deck's going to want to be, like, lots of probably counter magic or counter style magic.
Lots of tutors to get those pieces.
Lots of tutors are going to be really important. Lots of removal to stop your opponents from popping off and getting out of your reach. And you're probably going to want your curve to be really low. Whereas, if your perfect game is a grindy combat game, you're going to want like cards that have lots of value on them. I'm a big fan of like Angel of the Ruins.
Oh,
recently.
sick card.
Yeah, the thing that ETBs exiles 2 target artifacts and or enchantments. Like, that's a big 7-drop. That's probably not going to be good enough in your like combo kind of meta or kind of game. But if you're playing like combat-based stuff, that thing's going to do work. That's going to be like, I get rid of your Rhystic Study. I get rid of
your Ghostly Prison.
Yeah, or
fantastic.
Or your Lurking Predators. Like all these huge like Omniscience, these massive spells that you might be seeing in those games.
So I think that's a great way to look at it, of how from turn 1 to turn when do you want to win? How does your game play out? Are you ramping a ton on turns 1 to 4, or are you only ramping on turn 2 and then getting straight into it?
Yeah.
That is really going to influence what kind of ramp you include, what kind of card draw you include. And it will change how you even use services like Scryfall, because you know what to narrow down to.
Yeah, you might be doing your search and going like, I want to look for spells with mana value 1 that counter spells. Like, that might be your Scryfall search, right? You might be like, okay, I need a counter spell that costs less than 2. That might be your criteria, right? I think we should also probably, like, a lot of that's going to be really good questions to ask if you're, like, a really established player. If you're a new player and you just see a commander that looks fun, just build that. Like, there is seriously nothing wrong with doing that.
If you see the pre-con on the shelf and you've got cards already that'll upgrade it, grab it.
Yeah, and, like, even if you have already got a bunch of decks that are quite similar and you see another one that also looks like fun, if that's just the way you're currently enjoying Magic, build it. Because also, as we said before in I think it was episode 9, you can always disassemble decks if you need to.
Yep.
So, like, there's really no harm in just, like, throwing something together, seeing how it goes. So, yeah, don't let these questions stop you from doing stuff. Let them be sort of springboards into being creative about what kind of deck you want.
I completely agree. Now, I apologize for the quarter of an hour of philosophy that Walt and I have just dropped on you, but I reckon we should dive in to the nitty-gritty of the numbers. These are already pretty established numbers that many other YouTube channels and podcasts and Magic professionals have already probably spat at you, and you've already discovered before coming to our podcast. So should we run through these pretty quickly?
Let's do it. Well, starting with arguably the most important,
the most common in the deck.
The most common, it probably, yes, it
most
will
common
almost certainly
card
be
type,
the most common card type in your deck. Lands. I think, looking at all my decks when I was researching this episode, I think I go all the way from like 35 up to 42, which sounds like a big range, but is not that wide. Like, it doesn't go as low as 30, and it doesn't go as high as like 45. So we're still talking about like, 7 cards difference. Like, it's substantial, but it's not, crazy.
And it's pretty easy to distinguish when you want to run more lands and when you want to run less lands.
Yes.
Because your mana curve will show that and different things.
Yes, we are going to go into that later as well. So we're going to we're going to dive into each one of these topics. Like, this is just the numbers, so you can see them right now, get them in your head, but we're going to go through each individual topic and say, like, what we recommend in each one as well.
Because if you just listen to the first half an hour of this podcast, we want you to walk away with the numbers at the very least.
Yes.
And not have a situation like James's Scarab God deck where I ended up running below 30 lands. We'll talk about that when we get to the land draw. But I think the next most important thing is my favorite. It's card draw. And I think across my decks, I'm running 10 plus easy.
Yes, 10 minimum.
10 is
absolute minimum.
Base. And it's like, we'll talk about all the different types of card draw when we talk about card draw. There's burst, activated, passive, but at least 10 of any kind of card draw, which we'll define a little bit more in detail.
Because it's important. Not everything that looks like card draw is actually card draw.
Correct.
Yeah.
I think another really important thing that I'm really passionate about in my decks, mana rocks, mana ramp.
Yes.
Love that.
Ramp, super important. I think, again, we're going to go for like 10 plus. Minimum 10 bits of ramp. We'll talk about how you'll identify what is ramping your deck. Again, similar to card draw, there might be cards that some people might have told you are ramp that we are probably going to like burst the bubble on that a little bit, because it's actually I think you can define it pretty well. And we will a bit later.
Yeah, and I will allude to something that has been referenced on another podcast, something we aspire to be, the Command Zone. They've got a great deck building template, which of course after you listen to ours, you should go have a listen to theirs and compare and contrast. But Josh Lee Kwai, who is probably one of my favorite Commander players and someone I aspire to be,
me too,
has an incredible little clip in that he kind of says that the person that spends the most mana in a game usually is the one that wins.
Yes, it's true.
So ramp is important.
Ramp's really important because that's going to give you more mana to spend. And it's also going to factor in a little bit with how efficient your spells are, which we'll sort of talk about when we talk about curve and that kind of thing. I think the other thing, next most important, I almost think we're going from most to least important here, but still in the crucial category, I would say.
S tier.
S tier, exactly. Removal.
Yeah.
Removal. And we actually do break this one up immediately into targeted and mass removal. Mass removal you also sometimes hear called board wipes, things that sort of wipe the board clean. I would say generally things that say do something to all permanents, destroy all enchantments, destroy all artifacts, or even return all non-land permanents to their owner's hands.
It's removing it.
All of that is mass removal, and then targeted removal is going to be
it says the word target on it.
Yeah, that's basically the way to go. I think we're going to want to go for 8 to 10 bits of targeted removal. And board wipes and mass removal is a little more flexible. I reckon we go between 1 and 5.
Yeah, I think I know that sounds like quite a big difference between one card in your deck that does the thing, and then 5.
Yeah,
that's quite a big jump. But we'll break it down on why some decks will and some cards won't do or won't want it. If you're running big creatures, you don't want to be destroying all the creatures all the time.
Yeah, exactly right.
That's a great example. But I think one of the most important still is actually ending the game. Shout out to episode 1 when our audio was terrible, when we talked about nothing but ending the game.
Which I think is only available on SoundCloud now. I did not upload it to some of the other places because I was too embarrassed.
Go dig on SoundCloud if you want to find it for you dedicated Space Commander followers out there. But it's our win conditions. And also, I'm kind of put in this category as well, our enhancers.
Yes.
Because win conditions is something that, like I said, ends the game. It is a card that if it resolves, you're going to either come close to winning, eliminate a player, or just straight out win.
Yes.
And I think enhancers is something that it doesn't quite win you the game. It might not even do a lot, and especially not a lot on an empty board.
Yes.
But it does make your deck go vroom. It really puts the nitrous oxide in your engine.
Yes.
And I think it should be 4 cards that make you win the game, and maybe maximum 5-6 enhancers, something like that.
And we will dive into that a bit more, but around the 5 mark on both of those. So about 4 win conditions, about 5 enhancers for sure. The other one that is actually one I don't see in a lot of tutorials, but it's something that I use exclusively across all my decks. I like to call this category protection.
I mean, I'm a counterspell player, so I'm right there with you.
Yes.
Right there with you.
It's true. And counterspells are interesting. They actually sit in a couple of cans, which we'll go into later. But this is sort of what we would define as cards that are going to either protect parts of our board or protect our whole board. We even sometimes call these cards that protect our win conditions.
Or our life totals.
Yes. Protecting our life total is also going to be important in certain decks as well. And in this category, again, it's pretty flexible. I reckon we go 5 to 10 roughly.
Yeah, I think some decks, the intricate combo decks that are very delicate and a gust of wind will stop the combo from happening, needs more protection than a deck that's just going to poop out massive creatures.
Yes, absolutely. Agreed. I will, right off the bat, we've outlined those numbers. We do think they're pretty good, and they are what we start from, both of us, when we're building our decks. We had a very long conversation about these numbers and what we think of them.
It was close to a fist fight, but we ended up in a good middle ground.
I do want to immediately have a little bit of a counterpoint here, because I saw a really interesting Twitter thread recently by professional Magic player Sam Black.
Fantastic professional Magic player.
Yes, really, really great. We are huge fans, both of us, of his stream. I think he's Samuel H. Black on Twitch. I think he's Samuel H. Black on Twitter as well. Really, really interesting Twitter thread that I found, where he basically said that mana rocks, so these are artifacts that tap for mana.
Which is, be careful where you're going with this, because you know I love mana rocks.
James
I play red, blue, and black, and they are my RAM.
Yes, it's true. He said that he thinks that players get a bit trapped by them. Super contentious. I saw a load of Commander players weigh in on this thread or quote tweet it, when they make it a new thread that's referencing it.
This is the hottest topic on Twitter at the moment, not the Elon Musk thing. This is the real hot debate.
Although by the time you all talk, hearing this, maybe Twitter doesn't even exist anymore.
Quite possibly.
With how things are going. Anyway, it was a super interesting thread where he basically was I think players are using mana rocks where maybe they should be playing more lands or playing more impactful low curve spells. He was very open in saying, I'm not saying mana rocks are bad. I'm not saying that people who play Mana Rocks are making a poor choice. I'm just saying they're not this, like, be-all and end-all that everyone makes them out to be. He also very openly shared his Moxfield decks, his Moxfield Commander decks, which were casual. Yeah, he was just like, this is how I build my decks. I had a look at a couple of them, and basically he goes like up to around 45 lands.
Whoa!
Like super high, much higher than you're going to hear pretty much everywhere, right?
That is so close to 50% of your deck.
Yeah,
that is
really
so
high land count. And his curve was really low. And I had a look at some of his decks, and he had like sort of sacrificey, like Grixis kind of like sacrifice decks. And he had just a load of like really high value but low mana value creatures in them. So he had like Nested Shambler, that like one drop that when it dies makes the number of squirrels equal to its power. Just like imagine more creatures like that, like very small mana value creatures, but that add up over the course of a game.
Well, look, I actually the other day, literally about a couple of days ago, and this is something I had in mind, was this Twitter thread, was when I looked at my opening hand. I was playing my Liesa deck, which is a Death and Taxes kind of style, war by attrition
little
deck.
bit stacksy, but not like,
not
status, not winter roll.
Yeah, it's not
thing.
brutal.
No.
It's not that brutal. But I had an opening hand. I had 2 lands, a Soul Ring, and then a Signet in my hand. And I was like, this is molto bueno. This is the dream opening hand for a Commander player. However, instead of playing that Soul Ring on turn 1, I opted to cast Authority of the Consoles.
Interesting.
And then turn 2, I cast my Signet. And then on turn 3, I didn't even cast the Soul Ring. I cast something that was like, 3 mana. And
like
I just
Ghostly Prison.
I can't remember what it was. It might have been Italia. I'm not entirely sure. It might have been Talia or something like that.
Yeah.
But it was. I was thinking about this Sam Black Twitter thread in my brain, and I didn't cast a turn 1 Soul Ring, even though it was in my hand.
Because you were like, I think this is going to impact the game.
And I won the game.
Wow, really?
I won the game, and not only did I win the game, but that Authority of the Consoles stopped this super, super aggro Gruul deck that was at the table.
Wow.
It was just, big creatures. I don't think it was a Xenagos deck. That's the stereotypical one, but it was like...
a Gruul stompy sort of thing. It
hosed the haste. It, like someone played a turn 3 Rhythm of the Wilds and was like, well, guess I'm putting a +1 counter on everything when it comes in instead of giving it haste. Like, it really was impactful, and I didn't cast that Soul Ring till like turn 4 or 5.
Wow. Well, so there you go. So look, we're not saying that this is exactly like the way to play, because again, we like our numbers. We think they're a really good starting point. But I think Sam Black, I would say, is an example of that Kung Fu rule we talked about before, right?
He is a master.
He's an absolute master of magic.
He's got the trophies to prove it.
Yes. So, we should always listen to the pros. Like, me and James have played a lot of Commander, but we're not like authorities on the format. Sam Black, I think in the thread, said he thought that he probably has played a number of Commander games in the thousands over his life.
Far out.
So, like, he really was like, I'm not saying, like, you're all wrong, but I'm saying I know what I'm talking about, and this is how I do it. So, there are other alternatives out there. Don't consider everything we say set in stone, and we're going to talk about how you can always be flexible with the rules and that kind of thing.
And we will say straight off the bat, even though we're half an hour in already, we're not experts in this. Walt and I have been playing Commander consistently for around 3 years now, roughly. But you played Magic a while ago. I was playing a bit of Standard. But Commander, 3 years experience. We've built a lot of decks in that time.
Yeah.
I mean, lockdown, we didn't have much other choice. We've built a lot, but go out there and do your research, and also trial and error is also fine.
Yes.
Trial by fire.
Yeah, try stuff. Try going a little lower, try going a little higher.
Exactly.
How you go.
Now, before we dive into each of those sections that we gave numbers on, I think we should probably start by just talking about how we actually pick cards.
Yeah.
Because we can talk about card draw and ramp until the cows come home, and numbers and statistics and, certain, research done by universities on Magic games, but there is a huge database of Magic cards that are legal to play in Commander.
Probably the most of pretty much any format,
It
right?
is the most. It hands down, it is the most.
Yeah.
Unless you've got some weird, wacky homebrew rule that's like 0 bans, use any card you want.
Maybe, yeah.
It is the biggest thing. So how do we go about picking just 100 of them to go in our deck?
Exactly. It's gonna be tricky. I think there are questions that we can ask ourselves though to narrow this down. Probably the number one thing, and it's going to be a word that you're going to hear a lot when you're around Commander players, is synergy. So, like, does this card synergize with the deck. We also immediately add like further caveats here of like how many cards in the deck does it synergize with.
And you can actually count this. These are things that you can add numbers against.
Totally. So you might look at your Panharmonicon, right? And you might be like, okay, this is going to be absolutely nuts with any enter the battlefield effect that's an artifact or a creature.
Because
right?
it doubles it.
Yeah.
That is a great card in an enter the battlefield effect.
Yeah, if I have a Rec Sage and I get to destroy a Rhystic Study and a Soul Ring, sick. Holy cow, I'm miles ahead, right? But you should ask yourself, how many cards in my deck is Panharmonicon going to make do that, right? And yeah, I guess there's probably like sweet spots for this. I would say like, it's really tricky. If you're going to talk about like tribal kind of things, like like if you're having a wizard tribal, like a goblin tribal, I reckon you're going to want your tribal cards, like, you know, goblins get
Lord
+1/+1, that kind of thing. You're probably going to want like around 30 cards that synergize with that. With stuff like Panharmonicon, I reckon you could go a little bit lower because it is just going to be amazing when you get it. You could probably go more around like the 20 to 25 marks. You reckon that's roughly?
I think that's pretty fair, but also, you know, it doesn't have to be cards in that category. You can also think about card draw. Does my card draw synergize with this deck?
Yeah.
And obviously, you know, the commander is the best way to kind of identify if the thing that you're, or if the card that you're looking at synergizes with the deck.
Yes.
If you're looking at a card and it kind of even looks like the commander card, like it has similar words, and I know this sounds dumb, but even similar art styles, like sometimes, like it just at a glance, you're like, hey, there's like lightning bolts in this. My damage based deck, my targeted damage based deck is going to like this.
That's a wild theory, but I kind of like it.
It makes a lot of sense. They put a lot of work into what synergizes in the artwork.
They do.
Asking yourself, does this synergize with my commander? Regardless of what you're looking at specifically, you could be looking at enhancers like Panharmonicon, or you could be looking at ramp. Am I playing Mana Dorks or am I playing Mana Rocks?
Yeah. Is this an elf deck?
Is this an elf tribal deck?
My Mana Dorks are going to be better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I will say, like, I know I threw out some numbers before. I reckon the commander synergizing with a card just, like, breaks the rule. If the commander synergizes with the card and like, the card synergizes with 2 to 3 other cards in the deck, fine, throw it in. Like, that's enough.
Yeah.
You know, if that's the card that makes your commander insane. Like, in my Tygam deck, I have that Aura Aqueous form.
Great. I have it in Yuriko too.
Yeah.
It synergizes directly with my commander as well.
It's a 1-drop aura. You chuck on a creature. It makes the creature unblockable, and when it attacks, scry 1. If your commander being unblockable, like in my Tygam deck, that is incredible. In Yuriko, that's incredible.
Yep.
That's literally all you need. I don't need that card. I don't need Aqueous form for any other creature in my deck, but because my commander is Tygam and my deck is built around Tygam, if I'm going like, you know, cast Tygam next turn, cast Aqueous form, that's insane. That's enough to include the card in your deck.
I think that is a fantastic way to like define if this card goes in the deck. Does your commander like this card? Is this a spell your commander would cast themselves? Now, I think obviously when we look at building a commander deck, if we have our playstyle chosen, that's fantastic. We need to find the commander that fits it, because obviously one of the major rules in commander deck construction is that your commander's color identity dictates what cards you can include.
Yeah, totally.
So what colors are we in?
Yeah.
And I think the second we identify what colors we're in, you know, obviously now we've got a commander, or we've at least got, you know, we say, oh, I really want a Golgari Graveyard Reanimator deck. Fantastic. Now I know I'm in green and black. Now I have to think about green and black. What are these colors good at? And what are these colors terrible at?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So, like, yeah, if you're looking at a black and green deck, you are probably, like, Feed the Swarm, right, is actually a really good black card that we're probably going to talk about again later. Destroys a creature, destroys an enchantment. Importantly, it destroys an enchantment, which is...
First time black card's ever done that, by the way.
Black cards just don't do that.
Yeah.
Whereas green can destroy artifacts and enchantments, exiles artifacts and enchantments, shuffles artifacts and enchantments into your library. So if you're in a Golgari deck, you don't need Feed the Swarm.
No.
That's kind of overkill and probably hampering your deck, right? Because that's a 2-mana sorcery and where you could have Naturalize, Return to Nature, like anything else.
And also, it's a sorcery. There is literally, for the same mana value, 1 and a green, there are instant speed versions that don't lose you life. Like, it's just objectively the better color to be doing that job.
Yes.
So obviously, you know, again, if you're in a life gain strategy and you're in Jeskai, your life gain card's probably not going to come from blue.
Probably not red either.
Probably not red either. They're most likely going to be relying on white because white does that's incredibly well.
Yeah, that's white's thing. Like, I guess there's a few green cards out there that gain you a little bit of life, but yeah, most of your best life gain is going to be in white. So yeah, if it's just Jeskai life gain deck, if you're building a Kai card deck that it's life gain for some reason, your life gain spells are going to be white. That's just how it's going to be.
100%. And then again, like if you have to be scared of running into those traps like Walt was saying with Feed the Swarm. But like if your deck cares about casting things from exile, you might accidentally fall into the trap of running card draw instead of those impulse draw effects that puts them into exile and you can cast them until the end of your next turn.
Like a Prosper Tomebound deck, right?
Yeah, so if you're running Prosper Tomebound, there's great black draw out there. Fantastic black.
Yeah, Sign in Blood. Like 2 mana, draw 2 cards, lose 2 life. It's fantastic. Yeah.
But 100% better, Jeska's Will, Reckless Impulse.
Yeah, because you're going to be putting those cards in exile. And like, we're going to talk about it a bit later, that you're not really drawing the cards into your hand, but it's close enough of an effect that the upside is worth it. Right?
Yeah, and again, this word pops up again and again and again. Synergy. It directly synergizes. The colors synergize with what our commander is doing.
100%. I think another thing to think about when we're looking at cards, because the numbers that we sort of threw out there before are going to make it feel like there's not many cards left in your deck that aren't removal and aren't ramp and stuff. But you're going to have a lot of cards that fill multiple categories. So these are going to be like basically the best ones that you can possibly have. Tezzeret's Gambit, right, is a card draw spell, but it's a card draw spell that says proliferate on it. So if you're playing +1 counters, if you're playing poison counters...
If you're playing my Atraxa deck that's poison counters, you will run cards like Tezzeret's Gambit as card draw because it does another thing that your deck wants to do.
Yeah.
So a card doesn't just have to fill one role. If anything, it's brilliant. And we'll say this time and time again, and especially when we talk about like modal dual face cards that are literally 2 cards back to back.
Yes.
If your card does multiple things, awesome. Now we have more room to play with. Now we can put funner toys in. We can put the stuff we want to include in the deck.
Exactly right. So yeah, if you're looking at board wipes and you're playing a white deck, and let's say again you're playing a Jeskai life gain list, play Fumigate.
Oh, when it destroys all creatures, you gain a life for each creature destroyed, right?
Yeah, right.
Oh, that's way better than like a Blasphemous Act.
Yeah, exactly. And this is going to be a bit contentious, but in some ways that's going to be a little bit better than Wrath of God. Yes, Wrath of God's going to cost you 1 less mana, like it's more efficient. And again, ask yourself those questions why. If you're all about the efficiency, maybe go Wrath of God. But if you want the card that synergizes with your deck, run Fumigate. That's going to gain you 20 life.
It does 2 jobs. It blows up the board and it gains you life.
Yeah,
it's perfect.
Right. Exactly right. I think it's also worth thinking, and this sort of ties back to the synergy thing as well. It's worth asking yourself whether the card does something on its own. So we kind of want to avoid the trap here of playing synergy pieces that are only synergy pieces, right?
Yes, I've heard multiple people at game stores, and I've been to a couple of new game stores recently, which it has been really good fun and eye-opening experience. But I've overheard conversations where people are like, why are you running this card? And they over-explain why the card is good.
Yeah.
They do things like going, oh, this card is awesome if I have these other 4 cards and one of them was put to my graveyard this turn and my commander's been cast at least 3 times and I have at least 60 or more life and there's an L in my name and the month is July. Then the card is really, really good. If you have to do that to say why your card is good, it's not good enough to be in your deck. Sorry.
It's not good enough to be in the deck. And it's like the numbers we were talking about before, right? Like, does it synergize with 20 cards in the deck? Does it synergize with like 2 cards in the deck? And do both those cards have to be on the battlefield at the same time? That's the kind of, in most instances, those scenarios are going to be ones you're going to want to avoid.
If you're using compound sentences to explain
and it does this, and I also have this, and then Lurking Predators goes off.
Yeah, I think compound sentences are fantastic to use when deck building if you're saying the card does this and this and this.
Yes.
But it's terrible if it's like the card does this if this and this and this. And it's the difference between the if this. Yeah, yes. It's a really funny clause. But obviously we're going to loop back to these thoughts and these specific questions that we've asked ourselves time and time again about what color, what synergy, what to do instead of the regular traditional use.
Yeah.
Every single category that we're going to talk about, card draw, ramp, removal, tutors, we're going to talk about these things a lot. So we'll be looping back to this. But if you're thinking about, like, if you're already overwhelmed at the first half of a 2-part episode of, oh my god, how am I going to keep track of all these things to think about? We want to gush over a deck building website, which we are not affiliated with in any way.
We wish.
If there are Moxfield people
Spoilers.
out there,
Yeah.
hit us up, because Moxfield is the place where Walt and I build our decks. We have done for like 2+ years now.
I think I might have been the first one. I was like doing a bit of research. We used to use Tapped Out, which admittedly I think a lot of people still use because it has like a very active community and stuff.
Yes.
But
Lots of comments on Tapped Out.
Yeah, I was doing like a bit of looking because I was kind of like, man, there's like a bunch of these like features I think Tapped Out could have that would make it suddenly so good. And it just doesn't have them. So I just like did a bunch of research. I was like, oh, what are the best deck building websites out there? And this one just kept popping up, and it's Moxfield.
Yeah.
And holy cow, the first time I used it, I was like, wow, there's like so many different buttons. As you use it, I'm not kidding, James. The amount of times I have been like, oh man, this deck building site is like almost perfect. I wish it did this. And then I check the buttons. It's there, James. Every single time. I was building a deck, right, that cared about X spells. And I was looking at my mana curve, and I was like, well, this isn't right. Like, pull from tomorrow, right?
I'm never going to cast it for 1.
No.
Yeah.
Or even 0, right? But if you put it in a deck building site, if you put it in Tapped Out, it's going to put it in mana value 2. Because the card, technically, in your library is X is 0, right? So it's blue is the mana cost. But you're never going to cast it for that. So it's not like there on your curve. It's more like 5 blue, right?
That's a more realistic time to cast,
On Moxfield, you can just change the mana cost.
I have a Zaxara deck which is Expel Tribal.
Dude, I'm telling you, just like what you do is with an Expel deck, you put the X value as the minimum you would cast. So like pull from tomorrow, I'm like, I would probably never draw less than 4.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, 4 blue is the new mana cost. You can just edit it and make the mana cost 4 blue. It will put it in your curve at 6. It will do like a bunch of other really cool things. You can do stuff like search for tomorrow. The
suspend ramp spell.
The 3 mana sorcery that you never cast for 3 mana.
You always suspend it. It's suspend 2. It's fine.
It's suspend for 1. Oh, suspend 2.
Suspend
2 turns, but for a green. So yeah, you can edit the mana cost and make it cost 1.
That is wild.
Yeah.
That's where it sits on your curve. And like, that is just a glimpse. But this website, every single thing that Walt and I have discussed already in this episode about what to think about when choosing cards, you can actually tag. This is my favorite feature of Moxfield.
I think I'm with you, actually.
You can tag the cards to what they do for the deck.
Yes.
So, for example, you can be like #card draw, and then you can organize your cards by #card draw and #ramp and whatever, and it will put them in the piles that they're relative to. But this is the thing. I used to do that with my deck building on a playmat.
Yeah, I remember you used to like sort of lay it out. You'd be like, okay, here's all my card draw here.
And
here's all my ramp
them.
here. I can count. Have I got 10? Have I got 10?
But then I'd come to this really tricky thing. Was like, for example, building my Atraxa deck. Tezzeret's Gambit is a card draw spell, but it also proliferates. I don't have 2 copies of the card. So
when you're laying
which
out
pile
piles,
do I put it in?
Yeah, is it card draw or is it proliferate?
Exactly, but Moxfield puts it in both of them in front of you and counts them and gives you an accurate representation. Walt and I are literally head on head, like hands over our heads right now, excited about how good Moxfield is.
It's incredible.
And what we'll do is I think we should link a couple of... Your decks are very well tagged in Moxfield, so we might link a couple of Walt's decks in Moxfield. Maybe Kaza, Arami, maybe Golems.
I think I actually just like in the show notes have my profile.
Oh, there you go.
If you want to
explore.
if at any deck that I mention you want to check it out, it's in my Moxfield profile, which is in the show notes. So,
and when I become more studious and actually spend the right amount of time, and also realize that, I should be doing this because I've gotten caught out running less lands than I should be.
Yes.
I will upload mine as well. But you should go and have a look and I'm telling you, when you go into organize by, like group them by, go tags and just see how intuitive your brain gets when you see it in those piles. Because when you start thinking about, when I look at my removal pile in black-green, you're instantly going to remember, oh, why am I running Feed the Swarm? I've got green.
Yeah, you'll see it there laid out with the other cards.
Exactly. You're like, green's way better. I should probably run another green enchantment removal instead of black.
The one thing I'll say right off the bat, like, I think when you're looking at doing these custom tags, you're going to be like, oh my god, I have 140 cards. I have to tag every single one. This is going to drive me insane. If you use global tags, so I think you have to do like hashtag and exclamation point rather than just hashtag when you're tagging the card. It will save that in your Moxfield profile. So when you then go to build a deck again, like if you put Rampant Growth, right? Like the first deck you build on Moxfield, you like tag Rampant Growth as ramp, right?
Yep.
Because that's what it is. It's probably the origin of the word ramp.
Rampant Growth.
Yeah,
yes, it is a ramp card.
Exactly.
It does nothing else but put an extra basic land onto your battlefield tab.
Yes. The next time you go to build a deck and you put Rampant Growth in your deck and you sort by tags, you don't have to tag Rampant Growth again. It will chuck itself directly in that ramp pile. Super, like, seriously, I know we've said like a couple of times already, if there's one thing you take away from this episode, do this. If there's one thing you take away from this episode, do this. If there's one thing you take away from this episode, use Moxfield. It's actually insane how good it is.
Hashtag not sponsored.
Not sponsored.
That's how you can tell we're super genuine. All right, look, I feel like we've spoken for quite a while, so I feel like we need a interlude of sorts.
A thrifty interlude?
Well, I don't want you spending a lot of money, Walt. I want this interlude to be... We were so flamboyant in person just then. That was fantastic. But I think we should do our thrifty interlude for this week.
Let's do it.
So obviously each week Walt has been writing for quite a while now a blog post about that's called Thrifty Thursdays. Obviously goes out on a Friday afternoon. Thursday, obviously he's on time. But it's a card that is generally underused and therefore very cheap, but is really, really good. I've constantly got cards from Walt's Thrifty Thursdays blog posts and included them in decks. They're very helpful.
Thank you. That's kind of the goal. I really want to like show you how many great cards there are out there. I should say, I don't just feature the card and talk about it. I also write weird stuff about it. So yes, there will be the card and then there'll be some weird stuff. Do you want to read the card that I'm going to do this week?
I'd love to read the card. It's a fantastic card. Scholar of the Lost Trove. 5 blue for a creature Sphinx. It's got flying and it's a 5/5. The card reads, when Scholar of the Lost Trove enters the battlefield, you may cast target instant or sorcery or artifact card from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. If it was an instant or sorcery spell cast this way and would be put into a graveyard, instead exile it.
What a fine day to read a booketh! Oh, hello, young fooligan. I was perusing this handsome collection of explorers' journals a moment ago, and I was astonished to hear tales of our very own chief librarian, Monsieur Francois Goldard himself. Who? Why, he's me, of course. It's true, I may seem frail and spindly, but I assure you I was quite a trailblazer in my morning glory. Imagine my shock upon learning that you would be assisting me with the reshelving of these miraculous volumes, that I should be the one to bestow upon you my very own memoir. Then again, I did loan these myself and placed them in the return slide this very morning, as I do every Thursday, as my scholarly salary is based upon the number of readers who borrow my books. I suppose I must get budgeted, as they say.
Oh my! Wow, that Scholar, he character. What a dude!
I don't know where he comes from.
How old is he?
He's older than the universe. I think
maybe he's the Space Commander's granddad at this point.
You know what he is? He's like, there's like old, and then there's like very old, and then there's like retirement home, and then there's Studio Ghibli old person. And I think he's Studio Ghibli old person.
The type of wrinkles that blow in the breeze.
Look, you can see some of these zany monologues over on TikTok. We are posting some of them on there as videos, or I am, at G_Commander Community. So check us a follow on TikTok, and we'll upload every so often. I'm not going to commit to an amount of time.
Yeah, the TikTok is something we do on the side because, as you can tell, we're two goofy boys, and we've got a community of goofy Commander players too that like to be entertained by this. But we've still got so much to talk about, Walt. So I think we
do.
dive into it. And look, we've talked about the numbers. We've talked about what we need to think about when picking the cards. Now I think we actually should start picking cards to put in our decks.
I think so. And look, I think we're kind of going to double back to lands. I know you mentioned that first, but I think probably after lands, this is going to be the most important aspect of the deck in terms of, I think when I have done this wrong, it has resulted in my worst commander games, and it's card draw. If you do not have enough card draw in your deck, I cannot stress this enough, you will run out of cards in your hand, and you will not have anything to do, and you will hate it. Like, seriously, you will hate it.
And I think, like, even more than ramp, I think card draw sits in this really important spot, because if you have no cards in your hand, like you said, you do nothing. But the difference between having 3 cards and 5 mana on board to spend, you might have 1 5-mana spell and then 2 3-mana spells. But you've only got 5 mana, so you can only do one of the things in your hand.
You can only do that 5-drop, Or
the 3-drop, but naturally you're going to cast the 5-drop.
Yeah, of course.
But
you have the option.
But if you have 5 cards in hand, and one of them's a 1-drop, one of them's a 2-drop, one of them's a 3-drop, one of them's another 2-drop, and one of them's a 5-drop, you've got all these different options in front of you.
I can't even count how many options you have.
Exactly, because it's the difference between having 3 cards in your hand and 5 cards in your hand and the things you can do. If you're just playing out your hand, you don't have enough card draw. Chuck more in. So let's dive deep into this. I think right off the bat, we should actually define what we're talking about when we talk about card draw.
Yes. I think it's actually a little bit iffy because you are going to end up in decks where we kind of alluded to this earlier with what's the one that makes Treasures from Exile? I've completely blanked.
Prosper Tomebound.
Prosper Tomebound. That there's going to be decks where things that don't typically resemble card draw become very much card draw. You're also going to sometimes be in colors where you can't literally cast spells that say draw 3 cards on them. So if you're in mono red, you won't have any spells. Like, there aren't red spells that say just draw 3 cards. There's cards that say draw 2 cards, discard 2 cards, Faithless Looting, we like that a lot, but you might not have actual card draw, so you might end up having to run things that are more like card selection, and card advantage is going to be really important. So, like if you're playing a graveyard deck, for instance, like my Arami deck, right? Casts creatures almost exclusively from the graveyard. My graveyard is like an extended hand for me. So cards that say like mill 3 or put 3 cards on top of your library into your graveyard,
basically card draw.
They're almost card draw. So I'm not gonna lie, I still run card draw in my deck, but I don't think I run 10 cards that say draw a card on them.
But you have known when you have mastered the rules, you know when to break them.
Exactly.
And like, again, it's card draw might not be everything. In certain situations, there's certain times where I would rather the cards be on top of my library instead of in my hand, like in my EDHREC deck, because I reveal the cards. So Brainstorm doesn't technically draw you a card. It goes 1 for 1. It draws you 3 and then puts 2 back on top. So
you cast 1 card to use it.
Yeah, so you've cast Brainstorm and ended up with another card in your hand, but you're still the same amount of cards in your hand.
Yeah, if you have 5 cards in hand, you cast Brainstorm, you still got 5 cards in hand.
But in EDHREC, it's fantastic because I can put some stuff back on top to reveal.
Yeah.
And then when I reveal them, I put them into my hand anyway. So it's like I know what cards I'm about to draw anyway.
EDHREC is an interesting one because that's actually a commander that it doesn't say draw a card on it, but
it puts it into your hand.
You are drawing cards with EDHREC. So that would probably be an example of a deck similar to my Arami deck where you could go less than 10 cards that say draw a card on them because your commander just implicitly says, if you play your deck right, I will draw you cards.
Yeah, there's some really great commanders out there. Niv Mizzet Perun is one that every time a player casts an instant or sorcery spell, draw a card. Chillane is another fantastic card draw commander. Korvold, again, I think I've mentioned both of them twice already this episode. Fantastic card draw commander.
We've also mentioned it, but Prosper Tomebound. Again, it's exiling a card, but you can cast it. It lets you do it
It's
pretty
an
much
extra
anytime.
card. But I think it's really important that we're differentiating card draw, which is having more cards than you would if you hadn't included this piece of card draw.
If you hadn't like cast a spell or done the thing.
Done the thing.
Yes.
And card advantage. So, digging is like going 1 for 1. Like that's,
like Brainstorm.
Like Brainstorm is going 1 for 1.
Or like Ponder, like Opt,
Yep.
Preordain. All of these are cards that they let you like look at the cards and they let you pick one, but you're always going to end up with the same number of cards in your hand.
Even cards that, we've talked about that do multiple things, we love those cards. So a card like Crash Through is a card that says draw a card on it, but because you're casting that spell, it's just replacing itself. It does give something trample. So
it makes it better.
It makes it better, and it does two things in your deck, so it's a great thing.
But it's not card draw.
Correct.
We wouldn't tag it in our Moxfield list as card draw.
Exactly.
There will always be exceptions to these rules. So, like, you know, if you legitimately think there are ways you can cast some of these spells we just mentioned and they will net you more cards, then they probably do count as card draw in your deck.
Yep.
So, like, you know, in my Tygam deck, right, that gives my spells rebound. So when I cast my Preordain after combat with Tygam, I only draw one card when I cast it. Because it rebounds, I get that card again for free and I get another card. So
that is actually card draw now.
Yeah, right. I'm spending one card to get two cards.
Yep.
Likewise, you know, those sort of cantrip spells like Defiant Strike. You know, target creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn, draw a card. If you're playing a Feather deck or like a Zada deck where you're getting copies of those spells, that becomes 1 mana, draw 3 cards, or like 1 mana, draw 5 cards. So, you know, in those instances, yes, they will be card draw spells, but as a general rule, spells that just say, do this, draw a card, are not like card draw by themselves.
They go 1 for 1, and I think
which is nice as well.
It is good, and it's selection, and like obviously we've already kind of mentioned that, you know, red is a really great color that puts things into exile that you can cast until the end of your next turn, which is basically like putting it into your hand, but only for a limited time.
It's like restrictions.
Fire sale on this card draw. But yeah, like for example, blue is a fantastic card draw spell, but it also scries brilliantly.
Yeah.
Which isn't card draw, but it is card selection and card advantage because you can sift through the deck.
And I do a weird thing here. I don't know if you do this as well, where like sometimes when I'm looking at my Moxfield, we're just gonna keep shutting it out.
Until we get sponsored.
When I'm looking at my Moxfield list and I'm looking at my card draw, there are times when I look at my tag and I have like 13, 15, 17 spells there. But when I start breaking it down and looking at the spells that I've tagged as card draw, some of them, I'll give them the card draw tag, but they're kind of like, they're like half card draw, like their selection or their
0.5 score.
Yeah, I can't give them a 0.5 score. And you can sort of do like a little bit of maths in your head where you can kind of be like, you know, if I have 13 things that are tagged as card draw in my deck, but 6 of them are kind of like okay, if you counted all of those as half a point, 6 halves is 3. So then you'd have 7 full card draw spells and 3 effectively full card draw spells. You're sitting at 10. You're looking great.
Perfect.
So, like, yeah, you know, you can sort of consider that when you're doing the nitty-gritty of your deck and kind of being like, oh, okay, like some of this is straight up card draw and some of it's card draw with hoops.
Yeah, and now we have obviously said these numbers already, but I want to push them into this section that Walt and I at the very start of this episode said 10 pieces minimum for your card draw section is what we recommend. But
what do you think you average in your card draw?
In my decks? Probably more.
I think
than 10,
I think comfortably
easily.
more. I reckon I'm around the 15 mark as an average,
I think I generally lean into probably 15 as my minimum across my decks, to be honest. Just simply because I have this huge value of I don't want to just play the card in my hand because it's my only option. I want to be able to think about what I want to do on my turn.
I think Game Nights actually, because Command Zone, I always call them Game Nights in my head. When they did because they revisited their deck building template and they shifted some stuff based on like looking at some of their decks and what they'd changed. And they used to be someone who said 10 card draw is a good goal. And I believe in their new template, they said 12 to 15. And they did a similar thing with Ramp, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah. I'm still sticking by our minimum 10.
Minimum 10.
I think minimum 10 is a good place.
Plus.
Yeah. And I think even experienced players, it's a good piece of advice. You know, if you're always a player that, you know, gets to turn 5 and has 1 card in hand, put more card draw in. But when we have that number 10, there's multiple pieces of card draw that we can include in lots of different types.
Yeah, we talked about this before, I think.
Yeah, we have. There was a great question in our community Q&A episode.
Yeah, about do you prefer burst card draw or activated or triggered, I think.
Or passive,
I think the question was like, what do you think of burst card draw? But we ended up talking about the others. But yeah, so do you want to like go through our sort of categories that we have for card draw?
For sure, because I actually I'm a big fan of card draw, so when I see a card, I can kind of put them in certain categories, and I think it's important to have a range of different types of card draw in your deck, but there's 3 main types of card draw that you'll be able to find. The first one is burst card draw. And I think burst card draw every deck should include.
I think it's probably the best one, right?
I would argue that it is the best. In most decks, again, there are some decks that burst card draw is not what you want. Passive is always better, or in that deck or whatever. But burst card draw, I think, should be included in every deck for the reason of you get multiple cards in hand by spending one card.
Yeah.
And it digs you to the answers you need at the time. It makes sure that you always have a full hand. You're never in that situation where I fear of just casting the card because it's the only one you can.
Yeah. It's pretty much the only type of card draw you'll be happy to see when you're empty-handed.
Yes.
Like if you're top decking and you need a response right now, often better than drawing an answer is drawing a bit of burst card draw, right? If you draw your Harmonize and you've got like a million mana, you're like, oh my god, you know what's better than me drawing an answer for this right now? Drawing like 5 of them, you know?
Yeah.
So like cast your Harmonize, get 3 cards, so much better. That's the best top deck you can find.
I 100% agree with you. So there's burst card draw. Then there is activated card draw. Now, activated,
kind of like activated, like triggered as well is probably another word we could use for this.
Yeah, triggered card draw. I think activated is where you're actively putting something into getting the card.
Yes.
So, one of my favorite examples of this is Greed. I love Greed. I think it's a fantastic card.
Yeah.
3 and a black for an enchantment that says pay 2 life and a black mana, draw a card.
Yeah.
It's just solid, and it just sits on your battlefield, and when you need it, you just draw some cards.
Yeah.
And it is great. And I love activated card draw. I think every deck, again, should include some form of activated card draw, whether it's like, you know, whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card.
Beast Whisperer is a good example
Beast Whisperer
of that.
is a fantastic card.
There's also similar ones like Guardian Project, that when your creatures enter the battlefield, Guardian Project has a completely trivial hoop to jump through for Commander that says draw a card on it. It basically says every creature that enters the battlefield, you draw a card.
Yeah.
That's going to be an example of like activated, right?
Because you're doing something.
You're feeding something into it, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Now, the last section of card draw is one of my favorites because a lot of my decks have this in it, and it's passive card draw. So just like in activated where we have to do something to get it, passive is quite the opposite. It just will naturally draw you cards over a little bit of time. A fantastic example of this, which doesn't see much play anymore because I think it's just not as good, is Phyrexian Arena. Another enchantment, it's 1 black and a black, and it says at the beginning of your upkeep, lose a life and draw a card.
Which effectively says, because your upkeep is basically your draw step, it
Yeah.
just says every turn, draw 2 cards and take 1 damage, which when you have 40 life in Commander is pretty trivial.
Yeah, and another great card that this is now in my right color is Rhystic Study. That is passive card draw at its finest. Whenever a player casts a spell, unless they pay 1, you draw a card.
Yeah.
So unless they pay an extra mana for every spell, you draw a card.
Arguably the best card drawing Commander, probably.
I would agree.
Yeah. I think I'm with you. I think that probably most of my decks lean towards being mostly burst because, again, it's the one that's always going to get you out of a sticky situation. It's the one that requires no hoops to jump through. Like you just get the cards.
You do it and you get the cards.
Yeah, which is just like
unless it gets countered, like that's.
I guess so.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely also like passive and activated. I actually don't end up running a whole bunch of passive, I would say.
Yeah,
I kind of lean a lot towards activated. I really like turns where I get to like do something a bunch of times and get rewarded for it. And so, you know, when I have like this is not pure card draw, but like Jace's Sanctum that says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, scry 1. I love that card. I think it's like super fun. You're kind of like, oh my god, I do this, and then I get to do this, and then I do this.
Look at this.
I get to do it again, and again, and again. Like that's like the fun of Commander for so much of us, I think.
Yeah, I think that again, I'm going to stress that regardless of what type of card draw you're running, whether it's burst, passive, or activated, don't go under 10. And I'm straight up going to call you out on this. I remember when you were building your first mono red deck, and it has been disassembled since then. Walt built a great Krenko deck. It turned out to be fantastic.
Krenko Mob Bust,
It basically is a goblin tribal. It taps and makes goblins equal to the number of goblins on the battlefield. So this is a very creature-focused tribal deck. So card draw might have been right at the back of Walt's mind or something when you were building the deck.
There's a funny story behind why this number was so low. I watched the Command Zone deck building template. I just straight up remembered all the numbers wrong. Just like all of them. Like I just completely in my head was like, yeah, they said you should run 5 of everything. They just didn't say that. Even in the original template, they were like 10 bits of ramp, 10 bits of card draw. And in my head, I was like, yep, I'm totally with you, JLK. 5 bits of ramp, 5 bits of card draw.
Oh my god. So 5 pieces of card draw.
So, and in Krenko, because this is the thing, I was not counting halves like I was telling you about. I was in mono red. I was like, yep, faithless looting. Card draw. Which is like, draw 2 cards, discard 2 cards.
Which is going 1 for 1, which is what we were talking about, which isn't technically card draw.
It's nice, it's not card draw. I was going expedite. Target creature gets haste till end of turn, draw a card.
Again, 1 for 1.
Yep, 1 for 1, not card draw. I was like, yep, card draw. Cool, I've got 2, I only need 3 more.
And you've got 99 cards in your deck. How did most of those games go, Walt?
I just ran out of cards.
Yeah.
I just was top decking. And again, like, I think this is why I lean higher than 10. It just sucks. You just don't do anything when you don't have enough cards in your hand. So yes, I ended up going way higher because mono red card draw. Like, if you're playing a mono red deck, your card draw is just like actively overall worse than every other color, maybe except white. So yeah, like, you're gonna have to really stretch for your card draw, so it's gonna be doing those halve things I was talking about. You're gonna be looking at your 20 things tagged as card draw and mox fielding, being like, okay, all of these are a half point. I'm at 10, cool.
Fantastic. I just want to push this point home. I was playing with Walt when this Krenko deck was played, and I mean, a lot of you out there should know goblins are cheap creatures to cast.
Yep.
Walt was empty-handed by turn 4. Like, Walt would have an opening hand with 3 lands, cast a spell on turn 1, cast a spell on turn 2, cast a spell on turn 3, cast a spell on turn 4, and now no longer have any cards in hand.
Completely out of cards.
Yeah.
And it was the kind of thing as well, when you don't have any cards in your hand, the cards on your battlefield become so much more valuable. So when I would cast Krenko, and I had no cards in my hand, and then you would Niv Mizzet, cast 3 spells, Krenko dead, I was like, this sucks. This sucks. I hate this. I can't do anything. Like, I'll probably draw Expedite next turn and be like, yeah, cool, no creatures.
Don't even have a creature to target to draw a card. You have to give Niv Mizzet haste across the battlefield to sift a card.
Oh my word. It's really, I think it's the most important part of your deck, maybe except for lands. But seriously, like, if you build a deck and you don't have enough card draw pieces, you will have a bad time.
I completely agree with you. So I reckon without further ado, let's go through Wooburg. And let's talk about some card draw spells that we really like. So when everyone out there is listening to this going, right, I need 10 pieces of card draw in my deck. I'm in white and green. Now I have to find these cards. Let's go through a couple that we really like.
For sure. I think it's worth, like, saying right off the bat when we're going through colors that you should always, like we were talking about earlier, think about what your colors do well, and you'll get a more of a hold of this as you play more Magic. So, you know, if you're playing white and green, probably most of your card draw is gonna be green because green's just a little bit better at that. And if you're playing blue and red, probably most of your card draw is going to be blue because red's not so good at that. So, like, think about this with every step of the process. But yeah,
if you're playing white, most of it's going to be colorless.
White card draw. What's really, really good?
Anyway, moving on. No, there are white card. Look, everyone, if you're a brand new Magic player, let alone a Commander player, there is a running joke that white is the forgotten child of Wizards of the Coast who make our wonderful game Magic. And it just doesn't get treated well because there's not a lot of good white card draw spells out there.
It is going up, though. It's trending upwards.
And
they've been printing some really strong card draw spells that just happen to be white.
Yes, right off the bat, something that came out this year, Esper Sentinel.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Is so, so good. It is Rhystic Study the creature. It also, like, weirdly, like, on its own, it's a 1 mana creature that says whenever an opponent casts their first non-creature spell each turn, they have to pay X, where X is Esper Sentinel's power.
Which it's already 1.
It's already 1. So no matter what, they have to pay 1. If they don't, you draw a card. Yeah. So, yeah, it's like Rhystic Study for the first spell, non-creature spell each turn. However, because it's Esper Sentinel's power, there are decks where it's even better than that. Like, it's better than a 1 mana card draw spell.
Because you suit it up with a piece of equipment and now it's got 5 power.
Yeah, now it's like, hey, that rampant growth, you're going to pay 7 for it? Or can I draw a card? And they're like, obviously you can draw a card.
That's
plus one
fantastic.
counters is another one that does the same thing.
Exactly,
right?
plus
Yeah.
one counters. I really like Esper Sentinel because, I mean, I said it before, I really love passive card draw. And I also love doing the thing of, are you going to pay the one for that? I love being that Rhystic Study player. But look, Esper Sentinel is a fantastic piece of passive white card draw.
And that goes in basically every deck, for sure.
Every deck.
It's better in some, but it just goes in everything. I think there's like other bits of card draw that are going to be really good in particular decks, and they're going to be like things that white is going to be doing. So like Misa Enchantress.
Brilliant. If you're playing enchantments and you're in white, which to be honest, if you were playing enchantments, you should be finding a white commander to run.
Exactly right.
It's a good color to play enchantments
Yeah,
with.
but Misa Enchantress just says whenever you cast an enchantment spell, draw a card. So every single one of your enchantments now replaces itself in your hand. That's so good.
Which, I know we've talked about going 1-for-1, and in this situation, yeah, you are going 1-for-1 with the card, but that card, the Misa Enchantress, is going to draw you 5 cards.
Yes.
The cards that you were casting, like, you know, your enchantments, your aura spells, whatever, that are hitting the battlefield, they weren't going to draw you a card originally. Now they are.
So Misa is drawing you 4 or 5 cards.
And I think that's a really important distinction to make when we're talking about, you know, again, like, you know, we'll talk about Green and Beast Whisperer soon, but like, that card is the reason you're drawing all the cards.
Yes, and so it's also worth considering, I know we said at the start, but like synergy, you know, if you're in enchantments, probably don't run Guardian Project. Yes, it is an enchantment itself. I guess there's some synergy there maybe, but like Misa Enchantress is probably going to be better in your Enchantress deck.
And if you're in an equipment deck, run Shram, Senior Edificer.
Oh yeah, just like whenever you cast an aura, equipment or vehicle, I think, you draw a card. Pure Steel Paladin, whenever an equipment ETBs, you draw a card.
So if you've got both of them down on battlefield, you're drawing 2 cards per equipment.
Yeah, that's going to be really, really good. In Walt's favorite sorts of strategies, if you're going to be doing creature kind of things, Mentor of the Meek, I really like.
That is really, really strong. And honestly, one of those card draw spells that, like, Rhystic Study, for example, has got this name about it. When it hits the table, everyone goes, someone destroy Rhystic Study.
Yeah.
James is going to get way too much value off that.
Get you naturalized right now.
But Walt will cast Mentor of the Meek, and everyone's like, oh yeah, cool. But Walt will draw more cards off the Mentor of the Meek than I will off Rhystic Study.
It's true.
Because my Rhystic Study will get removed. It's one of those, like, stealth agents that runs under the radar.
For sure. I think there's something to be said for running card draw things that people are less familiar with, because people won't remove them. They won't see the appeal. Another one that I think is in a similar vein, I think even more obscure than Mentor of the Meek, probably because it's more new, Rumor Gatherer. Are you familiar with this card?
You're gonna have to explain what this card is. Is it a creature?
It's a creature. I think it's 1 white. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it's the first time this ability triggered this turn, scry 1. Okay, so the first creature every turn that you ETBs, it scries 1.
Yep.
If it's the second time, draw a card.
Whoa, so you scry 1. So this card's actually really good because you're going to have, to get the card draw, you're going to have scryed.
Yeah.
So you're gonna have like that double card advantage where you can sift, you know, you can scry, so you can see a land on the top and you go, I don't need a land, put it to the bottom. And then when you do get the next creature that enters, you'll draw not that land, you'll draw a better card.
Yeah, and if you're playing the right kind of deck, and I think this is absolutely nuts in a token deck, all those creatures that you cast that like ETB and make more creatures, like your Captain of the Watch, you know, enter the battlefield, makes 3 soldiers.
Oh, it does it on its own.
That
That's
becomes
genius.
just, you cast that 6 mana thing, scry 1, draw a card.
I like that. I really do
cool.
like that. Look, I'm going to throw one that if you're in white and red, this is a white piece of card draw, card advantage card. It puts more cards available to you than you should have. Showdown of the Skulls.
Oh, this is the like 2 red-white
for an
saga?
I think it's exile 4 cards.
Exile top 4 cards.
Top 4 cards, and you can play them until the end of your next turn.
Yes.
Which is a big deal, because sometimes you could cast this on turn 4 with 4 mana, and then next turn have 4 extra cards to think to use.
Yeah.
And I love this card. I love the card in Standard, and it was just a beast of a card draw spell.
Well, because this is another one that's going to do more stuff in your deck, right? Because that's just the first chapter of the saga. So sagas, for those who don't know, you put a saga counter on them, saga counter? Whatever.
At the beginning of your first main phase.
Yeah, so after you draw step, it's technically what it says, but yes. You move to main phase, it does another counter. The first one, only the first one, so that 4 mana First thing is exile top 4 cards you can play until the end of your next turn.
Which, honestly, if that was a sorcery, I'd probably still run it.
Yeah, Boros draw 4 is
Yeah.
fantastic. But the next 2 chapters are whenever you cast a spell, put a +1 counter on target creature.
And that's the next 2 chapters.
Yeah, so you have
it's
2 turns of that effect.
Buffing the hell out of your creatures. And obviously, again, when we're thinking about what colours do things really well, red and white are really good at suiting up one creature and making them really strong and beating the hell out of someone.
And
so
also going wide, right? It's going to
Exactly.
be really good when you're
token
going wide. You're going to be
strategies,
like, put a +1 counter on this like small thing and make it even bigger. Another +1 counter, another +1 counter, and suddenly someone's like, wow, I can't block that anymore.
Yeah,
like,
that 1/1
huge.
soldier's now a 6/6.
That soldier is jacked.
Yeah, he's worked hard. All right. See, look, we spent a good couple of minutes talking about white card draw. It does exist. I'm impressed.
It
But
does.
Blue. Now, even while we were talking about white, we were
James was
talking
thinking
about
about blue.
because blue is the color
It's
to be
the
drawing
premier
cards
colour.
in. It's primo.
You're basically going to have your pick of any type of card
Yeah.
draw you want. If we've already mentioned it before, Rhystic Study is just going to do everything you need it to do.
Yeah.
I've mentioned my Kaza deck. If you're going to be doing like X spells, Pull from Tomorrow just says draw X cards, discard a card.
Fantastic.
So good.
If you're in a flicker deck, which blue also does really, really well,
does.
like the flickering is when you exile something and return it to the battlefield. Muldrifter is a fantastic piece of card draw in those decks. It's flying fish. That's what it is. What creature type is Muldrifter?
I think it's an elemental, actually.
Is it?
I'm pretty sure it's an elemental fish. It might just be an elemental, actually.
That's wild.
Super strange.
The art is just a fish in a pond.
It's very fishy.
Yeah.
It looks like a koi or something.
Yeah, it's honestly, I love the card art on that
Really cool.
card. But it's a 2/2 that flies, and when it enters the battlefield, draw 2 cards.
Yeah. So look, like on its own, it's already like a reasonably good effect, but in the right deck, it's going to be crazy. So yeah, if you're playing a deck where you're going to be, exiling cards, creatures, putting them back on the battlefield, that's going to draw you more than 2 cards. If you're playing my Arami deck,
Arami is
that
brilliant.
Encores it, then for 5 mana, because that's the casting cost of the card, when you give it Encore with Arami's ability, when you Encore that, you get 3 copies of it.
Yeah.
Draw 6 cards for 5 mana. That's insane. They don't print cards that do that, because that's crazy.
Yeah. Brago. That's who I was trying to think of.
Oh, that's the classic Flicker deck. Yeah,
if you're running Brago, obviously, Muldrifter is a great one.
Yeah.
One of my personal favorites, which I think you would play more of if you played more blue, is Distant Melody.
Oh, is this like the tribal card draw thing?
It's so good. It's
so good.
I can't remember what the mana cost is on it now, but
it's 3 and a blue.
I think, it's 4 or 5. I think it's 3 and a blue. But for an instant speed spell, it says draw cards equal to the number of creature, or choose a creature type, and you draw cards equal to the number of that creature type that you control.
Yes.
It's bonkers. I run it in my Scarab God Zombie tribal deck.
Great in that.
Yeah.
Also really good. It's actually played in Pauper in Elves.
I'm not shocked, actually.
Because you can, like, there's elves that tap for a mana of any color, or you, like, tap 2 elves to add a mana of any color, so it becomes just a splash that just says, okay, I have my 15 elves, I'm going to draw 15 cards.
Far out.
I played in my Kaza deck as well,
Yep.
same thing, I've got 5 wizards, it becomes, like,
4 mana, draw 5.
in Kaza, pay a blue, draw 5.
That's
because
really
you reduce
good.
the cost, yeah.
That is really good.
really cool.
Another one of my favorites in blue is Windfall.
Great in graveyard decks specifically.
Yeah, and also in, like, if you're running, what's the... Grixis commander that every time an opponent would draw... Nekusar, there you go. If you're trying to make your opponents draw cards because you're trying to hurt them with cards like Nekusar or Underworld Dreams, which every time your opponent draws, you lose a life... Windfall makes everybody discard their hands.
Yeah.
And then everybody draws cards equal to the most cards discarded this way. So it's, you could be at a table and someone's wildly in the lead and they've got 15 cards in hand. And you could use this not only as a card draw spell for you, but a political tool to get some friends on side. Be like, hey, does everyone want to draw 15 cards right now?
Well, and in a Nekusar deck as well, right? Those cards are dealing damage to their controller. So can you imagine if you saw a spell that said for 3 and a blue, like each player discards their hand and draws 10 cards. This spell deals 30 damage divided among your 3 opponents. That card would be insane.
Yeah, that's so true.
You would never see that printed. But again, with the right commander, that's what that card says on it.
In the right deck, it works. So again, see how we're like naming cards and we're thinking back to what we were saying earlier? This is good. Feel like we're working well here. Well, let's move on. All right, black. That's the next in Wooburg.
Sure.
Black has some... I've already mentioned Greed.
Greed's great. Greed's like a really good way of knowing that you can bank on the ability to draw cards later when you want to. Instant speed as
Again,
well.
and also if it synergizes with a deck, I run it in my Liaisa deck, and another card that I have in Liaisa is Font of Agonies.
So you have like the paying life
Yeah,
synergy.
so Font of Agonies has this weird... It's basically on no other card that I know of. It's whenever you pay life, you put a counter on it, and then you can remove counters from Font of Agonies to destroy a target creature.
Yeah.
It's really good. So again, it synergizes with another card in my deck, so I really like it for that reason.
Yep, for sure. We also have some like absolutely crazy like aristocrats style card draw things. So some of it's going to be really simple, like cards like Grim Haruspex or Midnight Reaper that just say basically when a creature dies, you draw a card.
Yep.
There's going to be ones with like I was going to say more hoops, but it's not more hoops. Yawgmoth Thran Physician is just crazy good at this.
Oh yeah, heaps of hoops to jump through when you build a Yawgmoth Grand Physician deck.
Yeah.
Can you explain what that card does?
It's
because like
so stupid. It's got like a couple of the lines of text because it's Modern Horizons and everything does everything. But the most important line of text is pay a life, put a -1 counter on target creature. Oh, pay a life, sacrifice a creature.
yeah, so you're in an aristocrat's like sacrificing your own stuff strategy.
You do need to have creatures on the battlefield already. But you know, let's say you have like your 5 tokens. It says pay a life, sacrifice a creature. Put a -1 counter on target creature, draw a card.
See, that just you don't no mana required.
None.
Instant speed.
Pay 1 life per card.
In a 40 card format.
Yes.
And also, Yawgmoth is a legendary creature. It sits in your command zone if you want it to. It is just a good black card draw spell.
Absolutely insane.
Liliana Dreadhorde General is another one of my favorites in those strategies.
Yeah.
It's a planeswalker, but it has a passive ability on it. So it's got a bunch of upticks and downticks, but the passive ability says whenever a creature dies under your control, draw a card.
I think Liliana's passive just says whenever a creature dies, draw a card.
Ooh.
I think, because it's what makes her downtick so good, because I think her downtick says, like, each opponent sacrifices a creature, and I'm pretty sure it's not a May trigger, and it just says, whenever a creature dies, draw a card.
Oh my god, you're right.
Yeah. It's what makes it so good. It's a 6 mana effect, so it's going to be at the top of your, like, your, mana curve of card draw, but it just says, when a creature dies, draw a card.
I think, I run this in my Scarab God deck, and I don't think I've been drawing enough cards from it.
Yeah, it's crazy how quick that adds up. Someone attacks someone, and then the person blocking, like, has their creature die because they just like chump block, and it's like, cool, I'll draw a card.
That is wild. I'll also argue that card has one of my favorite Liliana arts on it.
It's really cool. She's like covered in like the runes, I think.
It's like all this purple magic swirling around her with her like army of undead like scarab things. It's really cool art. It's really cool art.
I want to shout out another weird but like I think underrated card, Morbid Opportunist. I think you've seen me play this now a couple of times in my Marchesa Aristocrats deck.
Yeah.
It's the one that says whenever 1 or more creatures die, draw a card. It triggers only once a turn. So some of you are going to hear that and going to go, triggers only once a turn. Oh my god, this sucks. It just says whenever a creature dies, draw a card.
So that's pretty much triggering 4 times a rotation?
Yeah, again, if someone blocks and their creature dies, you draw. If you have a free sack outlet, the absolute peak of this, by the way, is with a free sack outlet. So a sack outlet doesn't require any mana. And I'm blanking on the name, but the creature, Ophiomancer, that makes
a snake in every upkeep?
If you don't have a snake already.
Oh, that's a combo.
Every turn, you just sack one of your snakes to... the sack outlet I had was the Scry one. Weirdly... I had to draw a card and then scry because the creature dies and then the thing happens. But yes, I was drawing a card and scrying one every single turn, including my opponent's. Crazy good card.
That's really funny. When Grim Haruspex, Morbid Opportunist.
Yes.
Do you actively search out pods that are like 5-6 players big when you have that card? Because then it's like better, right? The more opponents you have, the better.
Would be. It totally would be. I can't say I seek out those games. I think I've made my opinions on 5 and 6 player games so clear.
4-player pods is where it's at.
Yeah.
But Black has plenty of really good card draw spells. There's also really good card advantage engines that don't say draw a card, but like 3 mana. I'm blanking on the name. 3 mana Black Enchantment.
Oh, Necropotence.
Necropotence. There you go. That is...
Yeah, I love that you said 3 mana black enchantment, and I was just like, I'm there.
I know exactly what card that is. It could have been Underworld Dreams.
It could have been.
But no, Necropotence
Necropotence.
is phenomenal. It doesn't
So
say draw
good.
a card, but basically you pay life and exile cards, and then at the end step, you put those cards into your hand.
Yes. It
It's-
also means, I think whenever you discard a card, you have to exile it. Like, you discard cards directly
Yes.
into exile. So, like, there's
A little
the
downside.
tiniest downside,
Yeah.
but it, again, says on it, pay life to draw cards. And it's not like,
Yeah.
not like Greed that says pay 2 life, draw a card. It just says pay a life, draw a card. No mana, no anything
It's
required.
just that, and you can
Crazy
just
good.
fill your hand at the end of your turn. But black is really good. Red is the next in the Wooburg list, and red
Bit trickier.
bit trickier because we've already kind of mentioned that red loves the kind of fire sale, as I put it earlier, kind of card draw effects. Like Reckless Impulse is one of my favorites.
Yeah.
It's 1 and a red for a sorcery.
Yes.
That just says exile the top 3 cards.
2 cards.
2 cards of your library. You can play them until the end of your next turn.
Yeah. So, like, again, in most instances, this is basically just going to say draw 2 cards on it, right?
Mm.
Like, it's such a small hoop to jump through to plan your turn around the fact that you have to play these 2 cards this turn, that it's basically, like, irrelevant. So it basically says draw 2 cards on it, but it also doesn't say draw 2 cards on it, because there are going to be times where you play this on turn 3 and you exile 2 6-drops. And you're like, well,
Whoops.
those just stay in exile. I didn't draw anything really
Yeah.
with that spell. So they're not card draw. Again, I'm super high on like calling these half card draw spells. There's other ways of drawing cards in red though that are like surprisingly good. They seem like they're a lot of hoops to jump through, but in the right deck they're not. Subira, Crossroad Caravaner, I think it's called. Are you familiar with this one? It was
Yes,
played
that
on
was,
game nights once.
It was. It's a legendary creature as well, so you can run this as a commander.
You totally
Yeah.
could. I think that's what it was doing in game nights as well.
Yeah, possibly.
But yeah, it's like 1 and a red. I have no idea what type of creature she is. I'm guessing she's a human.
Shaman, I'm gonna
Sure,
say.
she's a
Yeah.
shaman. We'll say that. I believe you pay 1 and discard your hand until end of turn. Whenever a creature with power 2 or less deals combat damage to one of your opponents, draw a card.
So if you're in a really big goblin, swingy, lots of creatures deck, this is perfect.
Well, my Krenko deck,
Yeah.
right? I found it was the kind of thing where it was like, okay, yeah, I pay 1 mana, I have to discard my hand, but also my 40 goblins when I attack this turn, each draw a card. So it's like, yeah, I pay a mana, I discard my hand, but I also draw 40 cards.
Yep.
So, and this is kind of Red's shtick, right?
It's a
like,
lot of discarding to get the card advantage. Like, that's a
you
really
have to
good
pay
example.
a really steep cost, I think.
Yeah, a really good one that I absolutely love is Bergie, God of Storytelling, but it's actually her backside.
Oh yeah, because she does like she's
She's one of those modal cards.
she's an artifact on the back, right?
Yeah, and it's the Harnfell Horn of Bounty.
Yes.
I'm pretty sure it's called.
I think so.
It's really good. Discard a card, exile the top 2 cards of your library, you may play them. I think to the end
This
of your
turn.
this
This
turn.
turn, I
I think
think.
it's this turn. Yeah, this turn.
But like in terms of
That's 1 for 2. That is
Yeah.
actually card advantage.
You
it's
are
not
going
1
up
for
cards,
1.
yeah.
That's you discard a basic mountain out of your hand, and now you've got 2 spells you can cast.
yeah,
Woohoo!
yeah, no, that card is crazy. I'm shocked people like obviously the front side of Bergie is
Mm.
crazy. It just is when you cast a spell add a red, but the backside is it's really solid. I also super like a card I've been playing recently is Commune with Lava.
Are you gonna? Is this a Thrifty Thursday include?
Maybe someday. It's an X spell, so X
Right.
red, so you pay whatever value you like for X. It's an instant. Exile the top X cards of your library. You may play them until the end of your next turn.
Okay, so it gives you like a whole turn to do it. So you can tap out, get a bunch of answers
So
for
you-
next turn.
Exactly. So you could like leave your mana up, and then before your turn, you could pay 3 as your X cost. So play 3 red, pay 5 mana.
Yep.
And then on your next turn, you just get 3 extra cards. But the other cool thing you can do is you can just play it as if it's a sorcery. Play it on your turn, do 3 red, have a bit of mana left over. And you're like, cool, I can play these cards this turn and next turn as
Yeah.
well, which
And-
is super cool.
And like if you've got mana left after using it as a quote unquote sorcery, if there's a couple of instant speed spells in that exile zone,
you can totally use them
on other people's turns.
Yeah.
And it's really funny in those instances when because when you exile, this is the thing with red, when you exile those cards, they're face up. Your opponents can see
typically,
what they are. And I absolutely love revealing a counter spell. I love this kind of stuff. And so say you're in blue and red, which you should be. If you're in blue and red and you reveal like counter spell, which is just pay 2 mana, counter and target spell, if you reveal that to people, people get scared and don't cast their spells.
They totally do.
Because they know you're going to counter.
Yeah.
But then that card has done more than one spell. It's countered 5 spells because they just haven't cast them.
Yeah, they'll keep that Necropotence in their hand if they see a counter spell there, for sure.
All right. I reckon next to blue, I think green and black maybe on the same level, but green is pretty good at drawing cards.
I reckon green is arguably, in some instances, better than blue.
There's less downside that green has to black. Black pays a lot of life and has to sacrifice a lot of creatures.
Yes.
Green generally just says, draw the cards.
Yes. And also, like, there's instances where the amount of cards you draw in green is just stupendous. Like, blue, it would make blue just have a fantasy. I was going to go into more depth there, but I won't.
My favourite example of that, Monumentous Fall. Momentous Fall. Yeah. I love this card. I run it in a couple of my green decks. My Golgari Elf deck is one that I run it in.
Super good in that deck.
But I've just built Ayula, Queen Among Bears, as well.
I've seen this deck. It's really cool.
It's so much fun. Bear Tribal. Who would have thought that I would be playing a mono green tribal +1 counters
and having fun too.
I'm really enjoying it. But like, basically, Ayula puts a lot of +1 counters on all my bears, so they get massive. And Momentous Fall is 4 green, instant speed, by the way. You sacrifice a creature
as an additional cost
to the spell,
yeah.
But you draw cards equal to the creature's power, and you gain life equal to the creature's power.
Do you really with Momentous Fall?
It's either Momentous Fall or another one of those. I'm pretty sure it's Momentous Fall though.
Yeah,
but it's
that's crazy.
4 mana, and like this is I love doing that kind of thing in response to a board wipe. Like the creature's going to die anyway. I'm going to get some value off it. So
that
one card.
No downside for you, right?
No downside at all. One card. I usually draw bears at 2/2s when they enter. Naturally, but most of my bears are usually like 6/6s or even 10/10s by the time it comes around. So I spend 4 mana and draw 10 cards. Off that spell.
That card's so good.
Yeah.
Similar sort of effect, but this one just assists on the battlefield. Greater good.
Fantastic, yeah.
Yeah, you just sacrifice a creature, you draw cards equal to its power, and then discard 3 cards. So obviously, you're not going to play this in token decks, probably, because you can be discarding more cards than you're drawing. But yeah, in those decks where you're making like a huge creature, this also is one, because it sits in the battlefield, you just sit there and wait for someone to remove something. You're like, yeah, cool. I'd love to sack this 11/11 and draw 11 cards and discard 3.
In response, yeah, you're gonna remove it, I'm gonna draw a bunch of cards off it.
Similar to the counterspell, people are not going to remove that creature because they know you're going to draw the cards if they do.
So these are like, again, more a kind of activated or burst card draw.
Yes.
But one of my favorite passive card draw spells in creature decks also sits in green, and it's Garruk's Uprising. Oh my god, is Garruk's Uprising one of my favorite pieces of card draws in any creature deck. So basically, whenever a creature enters the battlefield, if its power is 4 or greater, draw a card.
It also, when you cast it and it enters the battlefield, if you have a creature with power 4 or greater, you draw a card.
Yeah, so it replaces itself naturally. The other thing, it gives all your creatures trample. Yeah. So in the right deck, again, remember what we were saying earlier, does it synergize with what my deck wants to do? If you're casting creatures with power 4 or greater, you're probably going to want them to have trample. Yeah. So this 3 mana, by the way, 3 mana enchantment is an auto-include in one of those decks.
Yeah, agreed. I played in my Averna Landfall deck, and I was like a little bit hesitant, and I was like, man, like there's a lot of creatures with power 4 or greater, but they're not all of them. Like sometimes it's not going to draw me cards. No, it's amazing because it just says creatures have trample on it. Like
it's so good.
It's such a small hoop to jump through. You're already doing that, and then and
haven't you got a rampaging Baloths in that deck as well?
That's the tech.
Oh, that's a combo. So whenever you play whenever a land enters the battlefield, you create a 4/4, and when that 4/4 enters, you draw a card. So by playing a land, you create 4/4 with trample and draw a card.
You've created AEC Tyrant of Gaia straight from the precon, but without any of the steps and only 3 mana. Yeah,
I love that. Green is so strong. I'm going to give a shout out to a couple of other quick ones. Yep. Elemental Bond in those kinds of creature decks
similar
is fantastic.
To Garruk's Uprising. Yeah.
It's basically if you, at the beginning of your upkeep.
That's Colossal Majesty. Elemental Bond is creature with power 3 or greater ETBs. Draw a card. So and slightly easier hoop to jump through.
Yeah. Tusky Barrow Secrets in creature decks are really good too.
Go wide strategy is really good.
Whenever you deal damage with a creature to a player, draw a card.
Yep.
It's pretty strong.
Yep.
But one of my favorites in green, I know it's green and white, but I saw it the other day when we were playing your Golems deck. You know the card I'm talking about, right? It's
Glunch!
I love Glunch.
All praise Glunch.
It is such a silly card. It's 1 white and a green, right?
Yes, it's a jellyfish.
It's a jellyfish, and it's a 1/4 with flying.
I think it's an 0/4, actually.
Or an 0/5. It's something
weird.
The art is also weird. If you really want to giggle and you're looking and you want to look up this card, look up the wanted poster version of the art.
I mean, the D&D manual version.
Yeah, it is hilarious. But
yes, Glunch is so good. So
please explain why it's good.
I would love to, James. At the beginning of your end step, if Glunch is on the battlefield, you choose a player. That player draws a card.
So there's your card draw.
Yep. Choose a different player. That player creates 2 treasure tokens.
Ramping someone else at this point because we're drawing the card.
Yep. Choose a different player. That player puts 2+1 counters on a creature they control.
So you're buffing other people's stuff and ramping other people. Now tell me why it's good in your deck.
So my Golem deck, one of the commanders is EDHREC Salvage Splicer, which reads, whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put a +1 counter on every creature you control. Very importantly, so every golem you control and EDHREC. Very important detail. It does not say your graveyard. So if you can give other people treasures, they get them. They get some mana, but when they sack those treasures, you put a +1 counter on every golem you control.
So not only are you drawing an extra card on your end step for 3 mana, but you're giving opponents ramp. Sure, you're ramping your opponents.
Which they will like you for, by the way.
And that'll make you a friendly player at the table. But when they use that ramp for the first time and you go, right, I'm going to put a +1 counter on this golem, which makes it a 5/5, this golem, which makes it a 7/7, and this golem, which makes it a 4/4, they're like, okay.
I'm never sacking treasures again.
Yeah. And now Glunch is on your end step. You draw a card and people pile up treasures.
Yes, that they will never use. Yeah.
It is a great card. I saw it got played the other day at the table with Walt's deck, and I lost my mind over that card. It was so good.
It's so funny. I was so hesitant to put it in the deck, and then playing it, I was like, "This is insane."
And it's also hilarious. It's called Glunch, which is a funny word to begin with.
I think we spent a good chunk of time just laughing at the word Glunch.
It was when I said it's Glunch time.
Oh, that's what got us. That's true.
All right,
green's great. We've mentioned it.
Green is fantastic. It's on the level with blue. It's even in some situations in the right decks, it's better than blue.
Yep.
But we have to shout out our colorless inclusions because some people like to run Eldrazi's. I don't know why, but there are colorless pieces of card draw out there that are really, really good. And again, we've talked about how white is not the strongest card draw color, but you can run colorless spells in white decks.
Yeah, and some of them are going to be amazing. The one that immediately comes to mind for me is Skull Clamp.
That is... It basically reads pay 1 mana and draw 2 cards, but it's actually an equipment that gives a creature that's equipped +1, -1.
Yes.
And when it dies, draw 2 cards.
So the tech here, obviously, is that you chuck that clamp on a 1/1, which kills it immediately and draws you 2 cards. And because you paid the equip cost of 1, and the equipment itself is only 1, so the first time you draw cards, you've paid 2 mana to draw 2 cards. Every subsequent creature is pay a mana, draw 2 cards, pay a mana, draw 2 cards. Crazy good. I've heard people call for Skull Clamp to be banned, and not so long ago I was like, that's crazy. Nah. Having seen it on enough tables now, it is so strong how good that card is in the right deck. It's crazy.
I'm actually, I'm not surprised to hear that people want it banned. I'm just really happy that it's been reprinted in pre-cons and printed in so many sets that the card is really affordable.
It's like $4. Sometimes it floats a bit higher, like 6 or 7, but it's never more than 10.
Because if it was only ever printed like twice, it would be a really expensive card because it's very sought after. But Skull Clamp's fantastic in those 1/1 decks.
Yeah, or equipment decks as
Equipment decks, fantastic. Idol of Oblivion is one that I see you play a lot because it is fantastic in token decks.
I really like it. It's just a 2 mana artifact that says tap it, draw a card. Activate this only if you've created a token this turn.
Which, if you're in a token deck, you're gonna do.
Very easy hoop to jump through.
Yeah.
It also, wackily, you almost never do it, but when you do, it's nuts. I think you pay 10 and tap it and sacrifice it to make a 10/10 Eldrazi token.
I really need to run this in my Brutaclad deck.
You do. It is so good. Seriously, in a token deck, it just says, this is an artifact that says, every turn, tap it, draw a card. Crazy.
And my Brutaclad deck has untapped synergies in it. How am I not running Idol of I'm going to write that down right now. That's fantastic.
It's so good. I also really like... I haven't played this one a lot myself. Mind's Eye is actually a good option if you really scrapped for card draw options. Really good in a Scryfall deck as well. It's kind of a
when
weird
you're floating all that mana.
When you're floating
with
colorless
Scryfall,
mana. Yeah, so it's a 5-mana artifact that says whenever an opponent draws a card, you may pay 1 if you do draw a card. So one generic. That is, yeah,
it's funny you mentioned Scryfall. I see the value in Scryfall. That makes a lot of sense because Scryfall allows you to keep mana even though phases end. But I've seen this card in so many mono white decks because white, like we said, it has struggled for a long time and only really in the past couple of years got some tech. Yep. This card was almost always included in mono white lists. Yeah. Because a white player knows that they're not going to go up against 3 other mono white players. So they're usually going to go up a blue or a green player and they can pay a couple of mana.
Yeah, they're like, cool, I got no cards in hand. Pass to you. Go on. Draw cards.
Go on, do it.
I'll
pay 1. I'll draw a card as well. Thank you, by the way. I appreciate that.
The white player's not asking, do you pay the 1? They're saying, I pay the 1.
I pay the 1.
Talking to themselves, do I pay the 1?
Yes. I sure do.
Yes,
I sure do. I'm going to play more Mind's Eye pieces just so I can say that now.
I think it'd be fun.
So, card draw. I think we've effectively covered it. So, just to summarize, because these are big sections and pretty important things, I want to, at the end of each of these kind of pieces, we should summarize.
Yes.
At least 10.
At least 10.
Because we never want to end up like Walt in a Krenko deck.
It's true. We like burst better than we like passive and activated.
We should always have some form of burst in our deck.
Yes. We can include cards that don't immediately actually go up on cards like Expedite and these kind of things, but we should count them as like fractions of card draw spells, or we should think about how often where they're actually going to draw us a bunch of cards, like in a
Azada deck,
a
targeted spell copies for all the creatures.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're set on card draw.
I think so.
Next topic, I'm sure you're going to agree with me here.
Next most important,
ramp.
Yeah, agreed.
If we've already said it, JLK put it really well, of the person that spends the most amount of mana in a Commander game usually wins.
Yeah.
Now, they did a little bit of research around that. I know
I think they analysed their Game Nights games.
Yeah.
And were looking at how much mana was spent by each player over the course of the game. And they found that people who spent, if over the course of the game someone spent 50 mana and someone else spent 40, it was much more likely, not always, but much more likely that the person who spent 50 mana won that game.
So having a lot of mana is really important. Yes. But just like we defined card advantage, card draw, and card sifting and card selection in the card draw section, I really, because it does upset me when I see players cast spells that they think is ramping them.
They might even say, I'm gonna ramp right now.
And they cast a spell, but it's actually fixing them.
Yes.
Fixing and ramping are 2 very different things. Fixing your mana is when you're making sure you've got access to the colors that you need to cast the spells in your hand or in your deck.
It also sometimes is cards that put lands in your hand, so they let you hit land drops, which is still really important. So cards like Land Tax are fantastic for
There's a reason that card is expensive.
Yeah, it's really, really strong, but it's not ramping you. So I guess we should define what ramp is. Rampant growth was the example used before. It's probably a good example.
It's a really good example.
Roughly where we're going to end up seeing most of our ramp looking like. So ramp is going to be a spell that gives you access to more mana than you would have had if you just hit a land drop every turn. So on turn 2, if we cast Rampant Growth, right? We have 2 lands, let's say. We cast Rampant Growth for 2, we get our land. If on turn 3, the next turn, we untap, we hit our land drop, we play our land, we have 4 lands. If we just played a land every single turn of the game so far, we'd have 3. So we have ramped ourselves ahead by 1. The analogy I like here is the ramp is kind of like a ramp, it's
going upwards.
It's shooting you into slightly more mana than you otherwise would have. It's kind of a slope. It's scooping you up high.
Ramp up. You're accelerating your gameplay.
Accelerating's good.
You can cast that 5 mana spell earlier now because you ramped on turns 1 through 4.
Yeah, so we'll often use things we'll just say, blah blah ramps you, or blah blah ramped ahead by 2. We're just referring to how much more mana you are going to have. So if we say, I just ramped myself, you're saying I have more mana than I had. And if we say blah blah's ramping ahead by 4, we're saying blah blah has 4 more mana than they would have had before, right?
Correct. Yeah. And obviously Rampant Growth is a great one because it lands is a really easy way, and for a lot of beginners, lands is how you get your mana. But even Mana Rocks, If I pay 2 for a Talisman of Creativity,
Yes.
I've basically ramped because I've paid 2 mana to put another artifact, because Talisman of Creativity is an artifact that taps for a colorless, or it can tap for a color of blue or red and deal the damage to me. But on my next turn, I now have, if I play my land for turn, 4 mana. Just like a Rampant Growth, the Talisman has given me an extra mana.
Yes. I will say here as well, we sort of referred to it already with Sam Black. I think we should be hesitant about not playing ramp at the expense of lands, because it's also important to hit land drops. So
Yes.
ramp is like enhancing your lands, right? It's
Yeah.
letting you have more mana than you would have had. It's giving you, your mana rocks are kind of like pseudo lands, like they're
Yep.
lands that almost sometimes get blown up, but mostly just sit there and are artifacts.
Some players even put their mana rocks in their pile of lands.
Which I know you don't like.
I don't like it, because there are things that say non-land. Separate your permanents.
Yes, it's important to keep in mind.
But we've talked about like defining, fixing, and ramp, but there's another version of ramp which I kind of want to talk at the top of this section, because I
Sure.
think it's one of these weird ones.
It's kind of nebulous.
Yeah, it's burst ramp. And I'm going to call it burst ramp because we've called card draw burst card draw, and I
That's
just
true.
like calling things the same thing.
I feel like it's similar, yeah.
Yeah, but burst ramp, I'm talking about things like ritual spells. Now, ritual spells are spells that are usually a sorcery or instant speed spell that just add mana to your mana pool.
Yes.
Now, for new players, this might be a little bit confusing to understand, so I'm going to use an analogy that I've been using with new players for a while, and it actually really helps visualize.
I like this one, actually, yeah.
Yeah, it helps visualize what a mana pool is. So when you're sat at a table playing Magic, imagine you've got a little bowl in your lap. When you tap something that adds mana,
Like a land, like a forest or
so when
something.
you tap that little forest, get your little green mana ball and put it into your bowl. That is now your mana pool. You now have 1 green in your mana pool. Now you can do other things. You can tap that forest and then tap 2 other forests to cast another spell. That green is still there. When you move phases, that mana disappears.
Yes.
Back in ye olde days, you used to take damage for that.
Yes.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
Thankfully. If you want to play a deck that makes that happen again, there is a...
Yarlock.
Yarlock
Yeah.
does it, actually, funnily
True.
enough. Brings back a dead rule, wildly. But yeah, so that is a really great way of visualizing it. So, for example, a great ritual spell that is really commonly used is Dark Ritual.
Yes.
1 black mana, instant speed, add 3 black. So when you cast that spell, imagine you've put 3 little black balls in your mana pool, and now you can use those to cast another spell.
Yeah, you've kind of transformed, like if you tap your swamp to do that, your swamp created that black that you used to cast the spell, but that black has turned into 3 black.
Yes. Now, a very key thing of why I call this burst ramp is because, like I said before, when you move phases, you lose that mana.
You do.
So usually you need to use it in that phase, unless you've got a card like Crewfix where you can float 1,000,000 mana and
Yes.
it doesn't leave at the end of your phase. But that's what burst card draw is in my mind. There's plenty of
Best
examples.
ramp, I think.
Burst ramp, sorry.
Yeah.
That's what burst ramp is. So Dark Ritual is a great one. Mana Geyser is another fantastic
Yeah.
ritual spell. That
Really
is
strong ritual. 5 mana sorcery, add a red for each tapped land your opponents control. So, and that's all your opponents
Yeah.
cumulatively.
So in Commander, you've got 3 opponents.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
If you cast this on turn 5 and everyone's tapped out and they're all just having lands, you might have 15 red in your mana pool. So you've
Yeah.
paid 5 to get 15. It's pretty crazy.
It's pretty nuts. And in like decks that are huge mana decks, like big X-Spell decks, those cards are like almost game winners if you've got the other cards in hand.
It's true.
Jeska's Will is a really common one that's used nowadays.
Also draws you cards. That's an example of a card that sits in that intersection. If you're doing your Moxfield tags, that's going to be under card draw and under ramp for sure.
Exactly. Now, I will also give a shout out to some other burst ramp that isn't ritual spells.
Sure.
0 drop mana, fast mana that are things like Lotus Petal or Jeweled Lotus.
Yeah.
These are burst ramp spells.
It's
now,
true.
I call them burst because it's not ramping you for the rest of the game.
It's just that turn.
Just that turn. And in a similar vein that when you sacrifice a treasure, it's gone. When you sacrifice that Lotus Petal, it's gone forever. You've got the mana that you needed from it. However, you don't get to use it on the next turn. It's gone.
Yeah, and so like when JLK was telling us that the person who spends the most mana over the course of the game is usually the one who wins.
Mm-hmm.
This type of ramp, burst ramp, versus like permanent ramp like mana rocks and like lands, this is actually going to have a far smaller cumulative amount of mana over a game, right? Because like on turn 1, we can have a Jeweled Lotus, we can crack it for 3 mana of any color to cast our commander, but over every subsequent turn, we're on the same amount of mana we would have had if we played our lands, right? So yes, that it's going to seem great on the times that on turn 1 we get 3 extra mana, and if you're playing something like CDH especially, this mana is going to be so crucial to you for getting out your commander on turn 1 or whatever. But yeah, over the course of a game, if we're playing a more casual sort of thing, I actually think in general we should lean more towards things like rampant growth, because on turn 3 we're only going to have 1 extra mana, but if that game goes to turn 10, we've had 1 extra mana for the next 8 turns. We've got 8 mana from paying 2 for that spell, so that's like a much better investment of our mana than that temporary ramp is
lasted for the whole game.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, green does this the best when we think about our colors. When we
use rampant growth as the example.
Exactly. Kadama's Reach, Cultivate,
Nissa's Pilgrimage,
Sky Shroud Claim, even cards like Azusa that says you can play 2 additional lands on your turn.
Yeah, that's ramping you, right?
Ramping
You've got more lands than you would have had otherwise.
Green just does this so well. So in green, generally, if you're on EDHREC, which we'll talk about later, but is a fantastic database for commander players, you will generally see in any green deck those cards that we just mentioned that basically all put additional lands onto your battlefield and get you ahead in your rep.
For sure. Okay, let's break down, I think, now, because we talked about green and how green's really good at doing that land thing. Let's like sort of subcategorize a little bit more. So we do have ways of getting lands to the battlefield. We talked about that. We've got Rampant Growth, we've got Cultivate, that kind of thing. Green also has access to mana dorks.
Yes.
So like Llanowar Elves, Arbor Elf, like these are creatures that you pay green mana for, and they don't tap the turn they come down unless they have haste, but on subsequent turns you're getting more mana than you would have had otherwise, right? Because Llanowar Elves taps for a green, like you're getting an extra green every turn that you have your Llanowar Elves.
Exactly, and obviously these are a little bit more subject to removal because they're creatures and, board wipes, So I'm going to shout out a more permanent version of it. Cryptolith Rite is a fantastic piece of ramp if you're in a deck that creates a lot of creatures, because Cryptolith Rite says your creatures have the ability tap add a mana of any color. It's a 2 mana enchantment. It's fantastic. Other
Super
cards
strong.
like Millikin fit in really good decks.
Yeah, so that's actually colorless as well. So that can go in anything. I think cards like Millikin are going to be extra good. There's also the blue card. It's slipping from my mind right now, but it does exactly the same thing. Taps for a colorless, mills a card. Generally, those are going to be better in decks where you want to mill the card anyway. So like my Arami deck plays both of those cards. I also think generally with dorks, the ones that tap for colorless are going to be substantially worse than the ones that tap for color, and that kind of goes for pretty much all ramp that we use, right? They're not like terrible, but we're always going to be leaning towards ones that tap for color because they're just going to be more useful for casting more spells in our deck.
Which brings us to mana rocks as well.
Yes,
mana
which
rocks
we've covered already with Talisman of Creativity.
Signets are a great one and also really cheap.
Yes.
Generally, we'll make a bit of a rule here that there are lots of mana rocks out there, and when you use things like Scryfall to find cards that are 3 mana, Walt and I have kind of discussed this at extensive lengths, that 3 mana rocks are just not great. They're a little bit too costly these days.
They're a little clunky. I think especially 3 mana rocks that only tap for 1. Because there are some 3 mana rocks out there that tap for more than 1. Like we have things like it's slipping from my mind as well. Worn Power Stone.
That's a great.
Enters tapped, but taps for 2 colorless every turn, so you're actually kind of ramping ahead a little bit more. Generally speaking, there's a kind of a bit of a rule of ramp. We don't talk about it very often because it's kind of like in our brain, but usually you want your ramp, especially your permanent ramp, to give you roughly half as much mana as you spent and not less. So when you pay 2 mana to get an extra 1, that's going to be good, like Rampant Growth, like your Signets, like your Talismans. When you have Sky Shroud Claim, 4 mana sorcery that gets 2 forests, that's going to get you pay 4, get 2 things. That's also going to be good.
Thran Dynamo, you pay 4, you get 3 because it taps for 3 colorless
That's
mana.
a really, really good one.
Really good example.
But we're also going to see, a lot of they're typically called like Monolith style cards, right? 3 mana artifacts that say tap, add a mana of any color. It's going to be so tempting, especially when you're new and you see these cards everywhere because they always get printed in sets.
And they're always common, you probably got them in your collection right now.
You probably got 10 of them sitting around. It's going to be so tempting to look at that and go like, oh my god, I get this ability to have mana of any color. Even ones like Darksteel Ingot, you're going to be like, I get a mana of any color, it's never going to get blown up. This is amazing. Seriously, the upside of getting mana of any color is very rarely worth the fact that you're investing so much mana to only get one back.
The only exception I will make in this rule is because I think it's funny. Spectral Searchlight is a 3. I just think it's a great political tool, to be honest.
You play this a lot, actually.
I love this card because I love politics.
Yes.
Politics in Commander is such an underused resource. Spectral Searchlight is 3 mana for an artifact that taps for a mana of any color, but it actually says tap it and target player adds a mana of any color of their choice.
Yes.
So you can actually tap it and target one of your opponents and
give
they
them
can
mana.
get a mana of any color. So it is fantastic. Sometimes you'll hear someone go, oh, if I had one more mana, I could do the thing I want to do. And you go, well, let me bring out a bit of contract paper here. I can help you with this predicament that you're in. However, I'll have these conditions of no attacking me for the next 2 turns, don't counter any of my spells, don't blow up any of my permanents. Also, I would like a firstborn child. It is such a fun card to include. That
really
is my
fun.
exception.
Yes. I think I would extend that and say that pretty much any 3 mana rock that adds a mana of any color but can have extra upside.
Like, for example, Chromatic Lantern is a great example of this.
That ramps and fixes, right? This lets your lands tap for a mana of any color. I'm super big fan of. I'm slipping my mind again, but there's a 3 mana artifact that was printed in Commander Legends Baldur's Gate. Taps for a mana of any color, so it's like typical monolith. I think you pay 1 and tap it to untap target legendary creature you control.
Ooh, nice.
So in any deck where your commander has an activated ability that taps, like Arami, like Kaza, you're having a 3 mana rock that taps for 1, it's kind of a bit annoying. But later in the game, you're going to be like, oh wow, yeah, I'd love to untap Arami and activate her again in the same turn. This is so good. Anything that gives you an upside of above 3 mana for a rock or a dork. That's where you need to make sure you get them. Another form of permanent mana acceleration that we don't see a lot of these days, but does exist, is land auras. Yeah, so these are cards like Wild Growth is a really good example.
Fertile Ground.
Fertile Ground's a good one. So they enchant a land that you control, and then whenever that land is tapped, you get an extra mana. Sometimes like an extra 2 mana. I think I've got one called like Market Festival, where you add 2 mana of any combination of colors. Typically the rate on these is really good.
They're usually like 1 or 2 mana, which is fantastic.
Yeah, and then you're getting that extra mana, which is really good. They don't get removed that often.
I'll also make the point, if you're going to run a tap-untap type of deck, these are fantastic because you can stack these on 1 land, and then you can untap that land and tap it again for like 10 more mana. It's so brilliant.
It's got not necessarily combo written all over it, but like synergy and like
engine written on it.
It makes stuff happen. I've got a Sisei Shrines deck, but there's kind of like, I used this before, there's like a sort of secret commander in there. All the lands are snow lands, and the secret commander is Yorn, God of Winter, because you can fetch him with Sisei, because he's legendary, so you can get him from your library by paying 5 mana into Sisei, the tutor effect. And then, if you have auras on your lands, when you attack with Yorn and you untap all your lands, sometimes on the turn that you attack with him, you get more mana on your second main phase than you had on your first, because you like on your first main phase, you put a bunch of like auras on a land. And then you attack, and then you untap that land, and then all that mana you spent is immediately rewarded with the lands.
So even if Yorn attacks, untaps all your lands, and dies, you've ramped not only on your subsequent turns, but also on that turn, because you untap all your lands.
Exactly.
What a cool commander.
Yeah, really, really fun.
So that's a lot of permanent-based ramp. Now, I talked about burst stuff, which is like this kind of temporary thing, but there is less permanent mana acceleration and ramp that we can talk about as well.
And there's kind of stuff that sits like almost halfway between the burst stuff we were talking about before, like rituals, and permanent ramp, because it is permanent, but it's also kind of not like ramp like we would be talking about before. Cost reducers sit at a really interesting spot. So cards like the medallions, right? Like Pearl Medallion just says white spells you cast cost 1 less to cast.
And I'll make an argument that in monocolored decks, these are fantastic because on the counterpoint, if you were to play a 2-mana artifact, let's say the Diamond cycle.
Marble Diamond
is a great comparison. So
enters tapped.
It's 2 mana and it taps for a white mana.
Yeah.
In the game, on your next turn, you untap it and you tap it. You've generated 1 additional mana from that card, right?
Yeah, so it is ramp.
It is ramp. Yes, you're 100% right. In a mono-white deck, you can use that as ramp. Yes. The medallion, the Pearl Medallion, on the same turn, it will make a spell cheaper. So it enters and its effect is automatically applied to all spells you cast, because all your spells are white or colorless.
Yeah.
And then every turn after that, when you're on turn 5... if you tap Marble Diamond, you generate 1 mana from it. But if you've got 3 spells that are white and 1, that Pearl Medallion has made them 1 mana. Yeah. So you're generating virtually 3 colorless mana from it. Do you see what I'm trying to say here?
Totally.
That it's like, it's over a longer period of game in a monocolored deck. Mwah. Yeah. Love these cards.
I think these cards are probably a little bit underplayed. Every time I end up with one, I don't play the medallions, and they're not very cheap, unfortunately.
They haven't been reprinted that much.
They should reprint them, because they're basically only good in monocolored decks, but in those decks they're so strong. But like things like artifact cost reducers, so like
they are played quite a lot though.
Yeah.
I do see that quite a bit.
That's true. Like, so Ethereum Sculptor, Jorah's Familiar, these kind of effects that just say artifact spells cost 1 less. But there's also ones like instant and sorcery reducers, like Goblin Electromancer. Instant and sorcery spells cost 1 less to cast, right?
Blue and a red, 2/2, Goblin Wizard.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, ticking boxes already.
Yeah.
But like, you look at that and you're kind of like, cool, I'll get a couple of discounts, right? On certain turns, again, if you have the right spells in your hand, especially those ones that cost like 1 and a red, 1 and a blue, and you end up untapping with Goblin Electromancer, and you're like, cool, I'm going to cast these 5 spells that would have cost me 10 and now cost me 5?
Yeah.
That amount of mana you've saved just on that turn is crazy good.
That value is uncomprehendable, and I think a lot of us are just now used to putting signets and talismans in these like land ramp packages that we forget about these things. And not only do we forget about that kind of like math behind it of how much we're generating, but cards like Jorah's Familiar and Ethereum Sculptor, which reduce the cost of artifacts, combo.
Yeah.
You can generate infinite mana with these cards.
Yeah, Sensei's Divining Top is a really common one used for this kind of thing.
Super cool way, because basically, you tap it, sack it, draw a card, put Sensei's back on top, and then if you've got another card draw spell, you can draw Sensei's and cast it for free, and keep looping this and draw your entire deck, and you've generated infinite mana, and it's fantastic. These cards combo.
Yeah, they're super strong. There's also ones that reduce the cost of like creatures, like Nalia of the Hunt.
Yep.
Just makes creature spells cost 1 less. Often in tribal decks, you'll get creatures that reduce the cost of your tribal card. So there's a 2-mana creature that reduces the cost of Merfolk and Wizards by 1. I forget what that one's called, but in a Merfolk or a Wizard deck, that's going to be really strong.
Probably called like the Professor's favorite card ever. If you've not seen Tolarian Community College, the Professor, the host of that show, loves Merfolks and Wizards.
Loves them so much. It's true.
What a card.
Yeah. But like in Goblins, there's I forget what he's called. Goblin War Chief, I think, makes Goblin spells cost 1 less. So again, like in the right deck, these are going to add up, and cumulatively, the amount of mana you'll save is going to be so strong. Really strong. I think the other sort of ramp that sits in this weird spot that's like, sort of calling this like less permanent, right? Like semi-permanent mana.
Prone to removal.
Or it's not quite the same as those rocks and stuff. Treasures. Treasures are interesting, right?
Yeah, I funnily enough, like I said, Lotus Petal is burst ramp, right? Because it's a spell you cast and it generates you like the extra mana that turn. You tap and sack it. It's like a 0-drop treasure in your hand. That's basically what it is.
Yeah. All the rituals like we were talking about as well. Yeah.
I think the thing to note about treasures here, and why I didn't say that they're burst, I think they're like semi-burst or halfway house, is because in the past couple of years, Wizards have just really pushed how much treasure synergy and support and how many ways to create treasures there are. I mean, look no further than Dockside Extortionist.
Yeah, that card is absolutely insane.
It's when we did our community Q&A, our community asked us what 1 card from each color would you ban.
This is one of the few ones we agreed on, I think.
Both of us agreed that Dockside Extortionist in red. Look, I play it in 2 decks. it's good. You have to run it, but it's not banned. It's there. But
Yeah.
it's a card that reads, when this enters the battlefield, create a number of treasure tokens equal to the number of artifacts and enchantments your opponents control.
And again, like when people are ramping, when people are doing their cost reducers,
Yep.
a lot of these cards are artifacts and are enchantments.
Yes.
So you're going to look around your board and you might not even see that many like key synergy pieces that are artifacts and enchantments, but just the fact that every single one of those mana rocks becomes a treasure for you.
Yep.
Every single one of those auras on a land becomes a treasure for you. Every single heuristic study becomes a treasure. Every soul ring. Like there are so many of our favorite, strongest commander cards that are artifacts and enchantments. Every single one of those becomes a treasure for the dockside player. It's crazy.
It's nuts. And when you think about, like, on, like, first turns, right, people are usually casting these enchantments like Fertile Ground or the Soul Rings or the Signets on turn 1 and 2. On your turn 2, you're paying 1 and a red for a 1/2 goblin, but you're probably going to get, like, 6 treasures.
Sometimes it's more like 10 to 12.
Because, like, people ramp like crazy these days. It genuinely, you can get about 10 treasures on turn 2 just by casting it. So now you have 10 mana on turn 2.
Yeah, crazy.
Wild.
It also sees your opponent's treasures. We talked about how ubiquitous treasures are these days. So if someone else has got 10 treasures from their Smothering Tithe or whatever, and you dockside, sometimes they'll sack it in response to
there's
reduce
that
the
really
amount.
weird interaction where, because Dockside hasn't entered the battlefield yet, it doesn't know how many treasures it's going to create.
No.
So there's this moment where your opponents actually are allowed to sacrifice their artifacts or enchantments.
If they can.
If they can. I mean, if treasures, you just do it
any
immediately.
time. Yeah.
But they have to make that choice of, do I get rid of my stuff so they don't get more stuff?
Yeah.
It's a fun interaction.
It is a fun interaction. But yeah, treasures are really interesting because they sit at a spot where they're definitely not in that permanent mana camp, right? Because it's not a land, right? A treasure, once you sacrifice it for a mana, it's gone. Like you're not getting that specific treasure back. But it's also not a ritual because you can kind of bank them, right? Like, when you just said like Dockside Extortionist on turn 2, let's say you get your 10 mana. Yeah, like that's 10 mana on turn 2, but you don't have to use it then.
No, wait till turn 3.
Yeah, and then you might have like 14 mana, 13 mana.
And then win the game. Go ahead.
Treasures are really strong for that reason. They're printing up a lot of treasure hate now, which I'm actually really glad about because I think it was getting a little bit out of hand.
Well, I think it was seeping into other formats. It was getting really strong in not only Commander, but, formats like Pioneer and Modern.
For sure.
But
it's super strong, definitely.
Generally, there's a bunch of great treasure creators. Dockside is one. Prosper Tomebound is a fantastic commander.
Makes
that does
them
it.
himself, yeah.
My favorite is Curse of Opulence.
Not technically treasure.
But, it doesn't. It technically creates a gold token.
Yes.
Which, instead of tapping it and sacrificing it, you can just sacrifice it for a mana of any color.
It's very rarely relevant, but when it is...
Yes. When someone has a Blind Obedience down and your artifacts enter tapped, it's then all of a sudden very relevant.
Yes. But that card is so good. So it's an aura for a red that you put on...
It's a curse.
A curse, yes. So you would turn a player with this aura. And whenever that player is attacked...
the player attacking them creates a gold token.
And you create a gold token. The person who casts the curse. So like James, very often when me and James are in a pod... cast this Curse of Opulence on me. So
out
now...
of no malice, or it's usually because he's the objectively right player to... I'm putting this on record. Walt's usually the right player to attack. He's either playing life gain, or there's a reason to do it. I love you, Walt, but sorry, the curse has to hit you.
No, fair enough. I do win a bit. It does happen. So then every time James attacks me, he gets a gold. Every time, my player on my right that's not James, and the player on my left who's not James attacks me, they also get a gold. James also gets a gold.
And I strongly encourage it as well. Like,
every single time they go to combat, he's like, you could swing at them and get a gold.
you could ramp for free. Have you thought about that? That's something we haven't talked about. Curse of Opulence helps your opponents out as well as you. Just like Glunch.
And just like Spectral Searchlight, your other fave.
I love a Spectral Searchlight. You can go and check that card out. But all right, so we've gone through our permanent mana acceleration, a less permanent mana acceleration. We've even talked about that kind of burst mana acceleration.
For sure.
But now we need to think about actually what ramp, because now we've given them a billion different options.
Yes, there's so many out there.
We've probably overwhelmed you with this ramp section. So let's talk about this. Firstly, let's remind ourselves of the number.
10.
At least 10.
Minimum 10.
At least.
Yes.
And generally, if you're... The easiest way to look at it is look at your mana curve. in Moxfield, when you build your deck in Moxfield, which we've already gushed over, so we won't do it again, if you see a lot of cards in that higher mana range, don't just rely on hitting a land drop every turn until you get to turn 9, because most Commander games are over by then.
Yeah, especially if you have commanders that are sitting around like the 6 range.
Yeah, there's
I've got
lots.
a couple who like they really break the game when they get cast.
Yeah.
So subsequently, you want to cast them as soon as you can. When you get a 6 mana commander out on turn 4, oh boy, you are so far ahead.
One of my favourite examples of a 6 mana commander that comes out early is not who you think it is. I'm not going to say Niv Mizzet Perun this time.
For once.
I'm actually going to say Asterion. I can't remember his full title.
Me neither.
It's a 4 mana white, 4 black and a white, so 6 mana total. And it has this wild ability. It's a 4/4 with Death Touch and Lifelink, firstly, which is a great rate. Fantastic card already.
Yeah.
But at the beginning of your end step, you choose Feed or Friend. If you choose Feed, target opponent loses life equal to the life they lost that turn. So it's basically like a targeted wound reflection.
Wow.
Or if you choose Friend, you gain the life equal to the life you gained that turn.
Yeah, I've seen this card a few times now. Your partner actually...
My partner plays it, and this is why I'm spruiking it, because I've seen them drop this commander early, and as early as turn 4, and by turn 6... I look at the life total, and they're somehow on 80 life.
Or they've killed someone.
Already,
There are cards that just say target player loses life equal to half their life total. With Asterion on the battlefield, that just says target player loses the game when I move to my end step.
I do love my partner. Typically,
You do love your partner?
I do love my partner,
That's
yes.
nice.
I'm happy to say that on record. But funnily enough, Theo, my partner, plays 3 commanders currently. They have 3 commander decks. All of them are wildly different decks. So they've got Asterion, which is a life gain, life drain deck. They've got Streffen, which is, I can't remember his full title either, but it's a Rakdos vampire tribal deck, which when Streffen attacks, you sacrifice 2 blood tokens.
And you can drop a vampire.
For free, tapped and attacking. It's
Gained
also indestructible till end turn. It's wild.
So cool.
Now they have a new deck that's Runo, which is
seen this.
It's the Leviathan octopus
Serpent, Kraken, yeah.
Bizarre tribal commander. It basically, when it attacks, it makes a token copy of another attacking creature, but if it is a Leviathan Kraken,
octopus, Kraken, serpent.
Fish.
Yes.
If it's a fish.
If it's a big fish.
If it's a big fish, you make 2 token copies of the attacking creature.
It's nuts.
It's bonkers, but a common thread amongst all of them, all of their commanders are vampires.
Even Runo?
Runo is a vampire cleric, and then a Kraken
my
when he
God.
flips.
That's so funny.
Completely different strategies, completely different colours, all vampires. I just find that hilarious.
It does resonate with the way they dress.
Yes, true. Yeah, they do love that vampire vibe. Alright,
true.
We're digressing.
Back to ramp. Yes, so we're going to want to get those expensive commanders out sooner rather than later. So we're going to want to ramp. We're going to ramp a lot. We also, I think we're going to want to lean, we sort of alluded to this already, we're going to want to lean towards those more permanent types of ramps. So if we're in green, the dorks, the ones that get extra lands to the battlefield, those are going to be great. If we're not in green, mana rocks, especially 2 mana rocks, are going to be really good.
That's the sweet spot there. And again, we'll repeat, if it's 3 mana and does something else, then you can run it. But if it's just a manalith that taps for any color and it costs you 3, it's pointless.
Yes. Also, if you're going to be like the super spiky, optimizy kind of guy, kind of person,
which
when
Walt
you're building,
is.
Yes, I am. You can consider like the way that your ramp will interact with your curve that affects the casting of your commander. I'll give an example. My Targam deck, right?
Yep.
He's a 3/4 for 2 white blue.
So 4 mana commander.
4 mana commander. The best thing that he does is when he attacks, the spells that you cast until end of turn, instants and sorceries, gain rebound. So basically, the sooner you can get him out, the better, because then you can attack with him, and you get your spells getting rebound. The deck starts to work.
Yeah.
The thing is, he costs 4 mana, right?
Mm-hmm.
If on turn 2 I cast a mana rock that produces at least 1 color, like 1 mana of a color, right?
Yep.
On turn 3, if I hit my land drop, I cast Tygam on turn 3.
So you're getting your commander out 1 turn before he, quote unquote, should be coming out.
Exactly. Whereas if I ramped on turn 3, I might have 5 mana on turn 4, but I'm still casting my 4 mana commander on turn 4. So I'm sure you can see the line of reasoning here, right?
Yeah.
If I have a 4 mana commander that I want to get out as soon as possible, and there are totally commanders out there that are like this. I've got several of them myself.
Most of them usually are. Usually your commander should be, I want this on the battlefield because it does something for my deck.
Yeah, there are some exceptions that like want to do things later in the game, and those are totally valid as well. But if your commander is one of those ones that you want to get out as soon as possible, 2 mana ramp is going to be your gravy, because that's going to mean that on turn 3 you're getting it out, and it's a turn early. You're going to be set. It's going to feel fantastic.
I'll give an alternative example, because obviously an early commander is fantastic, but we've talked about these really expensive commanders. I run Brutaclad, Telecore Engineer, which is 4 blue and a red, so that's 6 mana in that really high costed zone. So usually on the first couple of turns I'll ramp, but I'm okay running some later card draw in my curve, or card acceleration, mana ramp, like Thran Dynamo. Because on turn 4, if I just hit every land drop and then cast Thran Dynamo, on turn 5, I can cast my commander and something else. So I'm making sure that my ramp aligns with my commander's casting cost.
Yes.
I think that's a good thing to think about.
For sure. Absolutely it is. And so that's going to be sort of your goal. Is like 2 mana ramp's going to be really, really good. Permanent ramp is going to be better, but you can still run some of that less permanent stuff, like the rituals, if that works really well with your deck, like the treasures, if that works really well with your deck, or treasures work well with everything.
I think something that's really important to consider when you're looking at ramp, especially when you're looking at signets and, you know, things that tap for a specific color, is what colors are you in? So if you're in 3 or more colors, mana rocks are good because they tap for a mana of any color. And this is, like we said at the start of this section, it fixes you and ramps you.
Yes.
It gives you access to the colors that you need to cast all your spells. Like my I don't have a 5-color deck, but I do have a Witchmore deck, which for the really dedicated Magic fans, Witchmore is blue, black, white, and green.
Every color but red.
It's my Atraxa deck, and I run a lot of 3 mana spells that actually fix my mana completely, like Dryad of the Lizengrove, also Chromatic Lantern, which we've already mentioned. This just makes sure that I've got access to everything I need, because my commander is all my colors, and I need that on the battlefield.
Yeah, that's probably going to be an example of a commander where, in a perfect world, you would ramp on turn 2 and cast it on turn 3, but the colors are so demanding that realistically, I think your goal is a better one, which is, I actually would prefer to know that I can cast this on turn 4 than to attempt to cast this on turn 3 and then realize I can't.
Yes.
That's going to feel a lot worse.
That's a great reason. And again, I think we've said the word about 1 million times this episode already, but synergy. If your ramp can synergize with your deck and with your commander preferably, that ramp is the ramp you should be including in your deck.
Absolutely.
So when you're considering, we've talked about so many different variations of, ramp, the permanent, the land-based ramp, all that kind of stuff. If you're in a landfall deck, run things that put extra lands into the battlefield, like Azusa or Rampant Growth or Kadama's Reach, which just...
Skyshroud Claim.
If it says put a land onto the battlefield, you should run it because you're in landfall.
Yes, I would also extend that a little sort of step further. We're sort of already alluding to it, but probably don't run other forms of ramp. Like if you're in a landfall deck, you probably don't need rituals. You also probably don't need treasures.
Correct.
You're mostly going to want your ramp, in fact, almost exclusively in a landfall deck, to just be getting lands out of your deck. That's just going to be the goal.
Not only in the early turns does it mean you can cast your 6-drop Firelaf commander, but it means in later turns it's doing the thing your deck wants to do as well.
Yeah.
I'll give you a really good example of making sure your ramp synergizes with your deck. One of our friends plays an Atla Palani deck.
Yes.
Atla Palani reads, whenever an egg dies. Such a weird way to start. She also paid 2 mana and tap her, and she creates an egg.
Yes.
An egg is a 0/2 defender, but whenever an egg dies, you reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. Put it onto the battlefield. So all the creatures in an Atla Palani deck are Haymaker creatures, right? So you've got cards like Zatalpa Primal Dawn.
You're going to have the Eldrazi in there. Ulamog, Ceaseless Hunger,
Blightsteel
Emrakul, the Promised End.
Yeah, all these game-ending creatures, right? Like the ones that you wouldn't ever dream of actually casting for their real mana cost. But if you're looking at a ramp package for Atla, don't look at Mana Dorks.
Yeah, Birds of Paradise is going to be kind of bad in this deck,
Yeah.
right? Because now when an egg dies...
You could accidentally hit Birds of Paradise,
Yeah.
and instead of putting an Ulamog, a Ceaseless Hunger, which is an Annihilator 2 attack trigger and exiles a bunch of cards and is a 10/10 and, you know, all this kind of amazing stuff, you're now putting a 1-mana 0/2 flyer that taps for a mana of any color.
Yeah, especially if you've spent the mana with Atlapalani to make that egg.
You've spent 2 mana to get a Birds of Paradise.
Yeah, not so good. Not so good. So
Yeah.
that's another one to think about is like, what is my deck going to do? Like, what's my consistent engine going to look like? And there's also going to be like, so that's an example. Both of those decks, so Landfall decks and Atlapalani, they're going to want to play landfall, like get lands on the battlefield kind of thing. The opposite can be true, right? If you're playing an artifact deck, even if that deck includes green, like my EDHREC Golem deck.
Yeah, you don't want to be running land ramp.
I used to run it. I used to be like, well, I love land ramp so good. It's so consistent. No one ever blows it up. I was playing my rampant growth. I was playing my, Harrows, my this kind of thing. I ended up taking it all out because I was like, well, actually, every single one of my mana rocks like synergizes with my deck in some way. If I have the ability to reduce the cost of spells, like improvise spells, which cares about how many artifacts you have, that's going to be really good. My partner commander in that deck, Rebecca, Architect of Ascension, gives protection from mana values equal to the mana values of artifacts I have. So for those who don't understand, it's so friggin' weird. But if I have a mana rock, if I have my Arcane Signet, right? It's a 2-mana artifact. If I have that on the battlefield and Rebecca, then my opponents can't do a bunch of things that pertain to protection, like target my things and block my things with mana value 2. So in that deck, the more mana values I have presented across my board, the better.
The better you're protected.
Yeah, so like mana rocks become insane in that deck. Like, yes, it'd be great to have lands, they're still going to ramp me, but the mana rocks become protection.
And if it gets destroyed or you sacrifice it, your other commander, EDHREC, will trigger and put a +1 counter on all your golems.
Exactly,
so it's like,
right.
Your land might not be able to do stuff. It's pretty guaranteed that it will stick around. But maybe at the end of the game, if you've got a sacrifice outlet for artifacts, you can just sacrifice them and then swing and win. So it actually helps your deck.
Yeah.
Obviously, again, like, big spell decks. These spells, like, things like Torment Hailfire or Crackle with Power, things like that.
So decks that want to cast that spell or copy that spell, that kind of thing.
For huge mana values.
Yeah.
You want mana acceleration that ramps you a lot.
Yes.
So you want things like... Gaia's Cradle was the first one that came to mind, but it's a very expensive card. It's a land that taps for a mana equal to the number of creatures you control. But
green mana.
Green mana.
Yeah.
But you can also run Cradle of... Gaia's... what's the enchantment version that flips?
Itlimoc.
Cradle of Itlimoc. It was something.
Flips into...
Rights of Itlimoc? Something like that.
Sure. Rights of Itlimoc.
It's an enchantment that flips on the end step if you have a bunch of creatures, and then it does the Gaia's Cradle effect.
It just is Gaia's Cradle.
So you can run that. Also, like Nyx Lotus is a great example that taps for equal to the number of devotion you have.
Yeah.
So if you're in
Thanks, Nick, for printing that card, by the way.
Yeah.
That's really kind of you to create a Lotus that's just named after you.
Well, it's Nyx Lotus. It's spelled Nyx. As in, like, the Nyx from Theros?
Yeah, it's the Lotus that Nick made.
No, not N-I-C-K. Nyx, N-Y-X.
I can't get this up.
We're doing bits inside the podcast now. It's bad. But yeah, so think about the synergy that your commander wants, and that will guide you in picking the right mana acceleration. Now, there's one thing that I want to mention before we move on.
Yeah.
It's the exception to most of the rules that we're going to talk about, but almost most importantly is in this section in ramp, and it's CEDH.
Yes.
If you are building a CEDH deck, most of the things that we've just mentioned might not apply. So CEDH deck, the rule for mana acceleration is the faster the better.
Yeah.
That is your rule for mana acceleration.
You also just like don't care really that much if it's permanent or not.
Yeah.
So, your stuff like those lotus petals and like those jeweled lotuses and like, your rituals like Dark Ritual, those cards, because they're going to give the ability to cheat out some of the best commanders that have ever been printed, like a turn, 2 turns, 3 turns earlier than they otherwise would have, those cards are insane in CEDH. And they're going to be like a mainstay of your deck.
Correct. And when I say faster the better, there is actually a subcategory of mana acceleration called fast mana.
Yes.
Now, fast mana for non-inducted players is mana that produces more mana on the turn you cast it than you use to cast it.
Yes.
So
So you spend, like, funnily enough, Soul Ring fits this category,
it's actually
right?
the easiest example.
Yeah.
Because you pay 1, and it's an artifact that can tap for 2 on the turn it comes in.
Yes.
Another great example is
Mana Crypt.
Mana Crypt. It's 0 mana for an artifact that taps for 2.
Yeah.
Another great example, Lotus Petal, I've already mentioned.
Yep.
Another great example, Mana Vault. 1 mana taps for 3.
Yep. There's pretty much every ritual, like 90% of rituals are going to fit this category.
Yep.
Some are going to be crazy, like Cabal Ritual. If you have Threshold, it's like a 2 mana instant that makes 5 black or something crazy like that.
There's also a lot of those ones that we just mentioned were colorless, but there are great colored ones like Chrome Mox.
Yep.
It is a 0-drop artifact that has imprint. So when it enters the battlefield, you exile a card from your hand, and then it taps for a mana of any color that card was that you exiled.
Yeah.
Mox Opal is a 0-drop artifact that taps for a mana of any color if you have 3 or more artifacts.
Yeah. Even stuff like Treasonous Ogre is going to fit this category because on the turn you cast it, Treasonous Ogre says pay 3 life, add red to your mana pool.
It's so dangerous. You have to basically be able to win if you
on
cast
the spot.
this card.
Yeah. So in decks like Godo, Bandit, Warlord, that lets you pay 4 mana for this, pay some certain amount of life to have 15 red in your mana pool, cast Godo, Helm of the Host, all of the fun stuff.
Win immediately. But yeah.
Yes. So CDH is going to break a lot of these rules that we've just laid out. I think the important thing to mention as well about CDH, we sort of touched on this in our last episode, actually, the CDH episode, which is that in general, brewing is less of a part of CDH compared to brewing for casual parts of the format. So
CDH is usually considered like a solved problem.
It's more solved, I would say.
Yeah, commanders that are CDH viable, and that's another important thing to know, that there are commanders that are not playable in CDH. Commanders that are CDH viable have basically a couple of lists that are the best version of that commander you can run.
Yeah, there's going to be like very minor, disagreements that certain people who play that commander are going to have, but I'm talking about like there will be 4 or 5 cards that they may consider swapping. The other 95 cards in that deck are locked in. They have no discussion until a new card comes out as to whether there's something that can be removed. So in general, I would say CDH does break this rule, but equally when you're building decks for CDH, like that's not really a thing that's going to happen. Mostly it's going to be that you might, if you're trying CDH for the first time, which we super highly recommended in that episode, it's going to be the kind of thing where you might load up your CDH list and CDH is going to break all the rules we laid out.
Yeah.
You're going to look at your ramp and go, what the hell, there's 20 bits of ramp. You're going to look at your lands and go, what the hell, there's 25 lands.
Yep, I have to admit, I wanted to mention CDH in ramp specifically because I think it's the most obvious.
Yes.
But generally, each section of deck building that we talk about, including card draw, including lands, including tutors, including removal, including protection, CDH will break those rules a little bit.
Yeah.
But I wanted to mention it in ramp because fast mana is just such an obvious difference.
It's just such a different priority, I think, when you're playing CDH.
For sure.
I agree.
All right. Well, we are getting a little tired now, but our command has not quite been received yet. We've still got a lot left to go.
I don't know if we have received the command. Yeah.
We've
So we've covered
ramp.
We have covered ramp. We've covered card draw.
2 of the most important things. So
I
we've got them out the way early.
Yes, we've done those, but we still have a lot that we talked about in that numbers section. We've still got removal, targeted and mass removal. We've got protection. We've got win cons, our lands, our enhancers. These are still things we haven't talked about. So Space Commanders, not yet received.
We'll be back.
We will be back
for a part 2.
Yeah. So, listeners, what do you think of our little templates so far? Do these like sort of numbers that we've thrown out kind of resonate with your experience building decks? Do they like resonate with what you've seen online? And are we going to change any of your minds? Are you going to run more card draw, more ramp? What's going to change from what we told you?
And please tell us if you've misheard the numbers and accidentally only run 5 pieces of card draw like Walt did.
Please don't mishear the numbers. It's so bad.
We'll run through them again. 10 ramp, 10 card draw.
Yes.
There we go.
Yeah, 5 ramp, 5 card draw.
10 ramp, 10 card draw, Walt.
Yeah, I got it, James.
10? This many? I'm holding up both hands, all my fingers out.
Yep. All together.
No.
When I look at my ramp and my card draw, there'll be 10 cards.
10 of each.
10 cards all together.
People, please do not end up in the situation that Walt was in and run 10 ramp and 10 card draw at a minimum each.
Yes, minimum. Absolute minimum. Well, James, it is tradition when we get to the end of our episodes to planeswalk out of here.
And is it my turn
It's
this
your
week?
turn. I planeswalked last week. So what's where are we planeswalking to?
I'm going to planeswalk to a really boring place for a lot of us, but it's work. But it's really exciting for me because I've just been offered a promotion at work.
Wow.
Yes.
That's huge.
Yeah.
So what's like, I assume there's, you don't give numbers, but there's going to be a little salary increase, I'm guessing.
Yes, enough that I've bought a new car recently.
You
because
did? I saw this.
Yes, I celebrated a little bit by buying myself a new Subaru.
Yes, it's very fancy. He's put in the footlights so that, because the paneling at the sort of dash is red, right?
Yeah, it's got all the numbers on the dashboard are red, and I've put adhesive LEDs in the footwells.
Yes.
So when I turn the car on, the footwells glow red as well, and I can actually change the colors. And most importantly, I can change them to blue. So now I've got a blue and red theme in my Subaru at night. It looks really cool.
Even for my cold Selesnya heart, I must admit it looks pretty cool.
Yeah.
The blue and red.
And it fits the vibe as well. It's a nippy manual car. But yes, I have got a promotion at work. I'm very, very excited to get stuck into it. I've already started the role because it's within the same team that I'm currently working. And I do, for those that don't know, I work at a university in Melbourne, and I do the marketing for that university.
Yep.
So I do a lot of the high school engagements, talking to future students of the university and giving them advice and, encourage them to come to our university and whatnot.
Yeah, and you've got sort of excellence programs, right?
Yeah.
That sort of incentivize people getting good marks and
Yep.
get them little sort of, I don't want to say deals, but they sort of
discounts, basically.
It
Kind of
helps
just get in.
Gets them into the uni. They sort of incentivize, hard workers, good people, this kind of thing.
Yeah, and I've been working with this team now for 4.5, nearly 5 years officially in the role that I was currently in. But even while I was a student at that university, I used to be a student ambassador.
Right.
So I used to do the guided tours on the university campus. So I would take school groups of 17-year-olds that are going, which university should I go to? And I would be like, you should come to our university because it's so cool and we do this and that. And try and be the cool guy that encourages you to go to uni and stay in school, kids, that kind of dude. But so all together now, I've been working with this team for 7 years or something like that. So I got offered this role, which it's a significant bump in responsibility and stuff, but I will be doing more major scale events for recruitment and sales in the university. So Open Day is something that I'll be tackling. Our Open Day season in Australia is in August, and that's around my birthday. And I've had years where Open Day at the university has fallen on my birthday.
Yes.
So I've had to go to work on my birthday. So to be honest, I don't think I'm going to have a birthday anymore. I'm just going to ignore it. I'm going to be 25 forever. But yeah, I'm really, really excited, and I hope I'm up for the challenge. But obviously, my manager thought that I was ready for this. So yeah, I mean, I've got a lot on my plate with other stuff, and I actually used, in the interview for the thing I was talking about, our incredible Commander community that we've fostered, this podcast that we've got. So I used all these examples of extra stuff that I'm doing, and but for the listeners, it's not going to affect the schedule.
No. Funnily enough, actually, one of the first questions I asked him, because James is just a bit of a workaholic, because I was like, do you think there'll be more overtime or less overtime? And you were like, I think more responsibility, but less overtime, which is good. I'm glad to hear that, because I think it's cool that you have more time for the stuff that you're really passionate about. I mean, you are passionate about your work, but really passionate about the community group that we have and this podcast.
I'm really excited to get stuck into my new job and to continue this incredible podcast. And Walt, we've been talking for a long time. It's getting late. I think we should put a pin in this.
Yes.
We'll come back to the command next week or next fortnight.
Next
time. Whenever that is for you, it'll be that time for you. But for Walt and I, probably a cup of tea away, to be honest.
It's looking likely. All right. Well, thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you very soon
for part 2 of the complete deck building guide.
That's it. Catch you soon.
Bye.